I showed up to my wife's office with a flower bouquet and a flight ticket to Paris for Valentine, only to see my wife's co-workers congratulating her on her engagement with the CEO. Then my wife kissed him and flashed the diamond ring, while everyone cheered. So I walked away, quietly canceled every payment, trip, and pulled out my 83% company share, $557 million worth. Minutes later, my phone lit up with 356 missed calls, and someone showed up at my door. So here's the thing about Valentine's Day. It's basically a corporate conspiracy designed to make guys like me panic buy overpriced flowers and pretend we're romantic geniuses. But after 7 years of marriage to Sophia Monroe, I figured I'd actually earned the right to do something genuinely thoughtful. Hence why I'm standing in the marble and glass cathedral that is Leorateca's lobby at 9 a.m. sharp, clutching a bouquet of red roses that cost more than most people's car payments and 2 first-class tickets to Paris that I'd been planning for months. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Adrian, you romantic genius, surprising your wife at work like some kind of rom-com hero. Trust me, that's exactly what I was thinking too. 7 years of marriage, and I wanted to recapture that spark from the early days when she'd look at me like I hung the moon instead of like I forgot to take out the trash again. The Leoratec lobby is one of those aggressively modern spaces that screams, "We have money, and we want you to know it." Floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek reception desk that probably costs more than a house, and enough chrome to blind a small aircraft. The kind of place where you feel underdressed even when you're wearing a $1,000 suit. Which, for the record, I absolutely was. I'd rehearsed this moment in my head about 50 times. Walk in, find Sophia, present flowers with a flourish, reveal the Paris tickets like some kind of magician pulling rabbits out of hats. Maybe she'd tear up a little. Maybe she'd kiss me right there in front of everyone. Maybe we'd have one of those moments that reminds you why you fell in love in the first place. But here's the thing about life. It's got a twisted sense of humor that makes Murphy's Law look optimistic. The first clue something was off? The noise. Instead of the usual corporate hum of keyboards clicking and coffee machines gurgling, I heard clapping. Like, enthusiastic clapping. The kind you hear at graduation ceremonies or when someone announces they're pregnant. The second clue. The phones. Every single person in that lobby had their phone out, cameras flashing like I'd walked into a paparazzi convention. Which, let me tell you, is not exactly the intimate romantic moment I was going for, and then I saw it. Or rather, I saw them, right there in the center of the atrium, surrounded by what looked like half the company's workforce, was my wife. Sophia Monroe, in all her perfectly coiffed, designer-dressed glory. And she wasn't alone. Damien Locke, CEO of our biggest competitor, tall enough to play basketball and groomed like he stepped out of a men's magazine, was down on one knee, in front of my wife, sliding what looked suspiciously like a diamond ring onto her finger. For a second, I thought maybe I was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Maybe I'd finally snapped from too many 18-hour work days and my brain was playing tricks on me. But then Sophia leaned down and kissed him. Not a quick peck. Not an awkward business relationship thing. A full-on, passionate, "I've been waiting for this moment my whole life" kiss. The crowd erupted. "Congratulations," they chanted, like they were at a sporting event and their team had just scored the winning touchdown. Phones kept flashing. Someone might have actually thrown confetti, though that could have been the stress-induced hallucination thing again. I stood there like a statue, still holding my romantic gesture supplies, watching my marriage implode in real time, while surrounded by what felt like the world's most enthusiastic audience. The roses in my hand suddenly felt ridiculous. Like showing up to a gunfight with a water balloon. The Paris tickets might as well have been Monopoly money. 7 years of marriage, and apparently I'd missed the memo about the divorce. Here's what's really messed up. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the flowers dramatically and storm out like some scorned lover in a soap opera. I didn't even clear my throat loudly or make one of those passive-aggressive comments that would have at least acknowledged my existence. I just stood there, processing the fact that my wife was currently making out with another man while wearing his engagement ring. And somehow the most surreal part was that everyone else seemed totally fine with this situation. Like they'd all gotten an invitation to this little celebration, and somehow mine had gotten lost in the mail. Chloe Tan, the receptionist, caught my eye from behind her desk. Poor kid looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. She gave me this bewildered look that clearly said, "Sir, I have no idea what's happening here, but I'm pretty sure it's not good. I nodded at her, because apparently my brain had decided that polite acknowledgement was the appropriate response to watching your marriage end in front of a live studio audience, and turned around. The New York wind hit me like a slap in the face as I walked back onto the street. February in the city is brutal on a good day, but when you're carrying dead roses and useless plane tickets, it feels downright vindictive. I stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, watching people hurry past in their winter coats, everyone wrapped up in their own little worlds, completely oblivious to the fact that mine had just gotten nuked from orbit. The funny thing about betrayal is how quiet it is in the moment. You'd expect violins or dramatic music or at least some kind of soundtrack to mark the occasion. Instead, you get car horns and the distant rumble of the subway and the sound of your own breathing, which suddenly seems way too loud. I looked down at the roses in my hand. Still perfect, still red, still completely pointless. The Paris tickets were getting soggy from the humidity, probably ruined already. 7 years of marriage, and this is how it ends. Not with a fight or a conversation or even a text message. With a public engagement party that I apparently wasn't invited to. Welcome to my life, folks. Population: one very confused, very betrayed, and very pissed off husband who just learned that his wife has been auditioning for a replacement. So there I was, back in my penthouse like some kind of wounded animal returning to its cave. 34th floor of a building that cost more than most small countries' GDP, with a view of Manhattan that real estate agents describe as breathtaking, and I usually call Tuesday. But today it looked like a concrete graveyard, and I felt right at home that I set those pathetic roses on the kitchen counter like I was laying flowers on a grave. Which, let's be honest, I basically was. The marriage was dead. I just hadn't gotten the death certificate yet. The Paris ticket sat next to them, soggy and useless, like a cruel joke the universe had decided to play on me. Here's the thing about being betrayed. Your brain goes through this weird process where it tries to make sense of something that fundamentally doesn't make sense. Like, how do you wake up married and go to bed? Whatever the hell I was now. Divorced? Separated? Publicly humiliated? There really should be a better word for guy whose wife just got engaged to someone else while he was holding Valentine's gifts. But then something clicked. Maybe it was the shock wearing off, or maybe it was the 3 fingers of Glendronach I'd just poured myself. 25-year-old single malt that costs more per ounce than most people make in an hour. Whatever it was, my brain shifted from wounded husband mode to pissed-off businessman mode. And that's when I remembered something very important. I walked over to my office. Because yes, I have an office in my apartment. Because when you're worth what I'm worth, you can have whatever the hell you want, and stopped in front of my favorite piece of art. It's this gorgeous oil painting of the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset, commissioned from some artist in Soho who charges ridiculous amounts to paint things you can see for free if you just walk outside. But the painting isn't the point. The painting is what's hiding the safe that I punched in the code, Sophia's birthday, because I'm apparently a sentimental idiot, and pulled out a folder labeled Core Assets. Boring name for what might be the most important documents in my life, but I've always believed in understated file organization. Inside that folder were the papers that told the real story. The incorporation documents for Leoratech, dated 7 years ago. The patent filings for the core technology that makes everything work, filed under my name, Adrian Kwan. The funding receipts showing exactly who put up the initial capital. The ownership structure that everyone seems to have conveniently forgotten, 83%. That's how much of Leoratech I own. $557 million worth of company, and I own 83% of it. Sophia? She owns exactly 0%. She's an employee, a very well-paid, very public-facing employee, but an employee nonetheless. The face of the company, as the board likes to say. The one who goes to conferences and gives interviews and poses for magazine covers, while I do the actual work of keeping the lights on. Don't get me wrong. She's good at what she does. Brilliant, even. She can work a room like a politician, charm investors like a snake oil salesman, and make our boring-as-hell enterprise software sound like the most exciting thing since sliced bread. But at the end of the day, she's the actress, and I'm the director, producer, and guy who owns the theater. I spread the documents across my desk like I was planning a military campaign. Which, come to think of it, I basically was. 7 years of letting my wife take credit for my work, 7 years of standing in the background while she got the applause, 7 years of being the technical guy while she was the visionary. Well, congratulations, Sophia. You just declared war on the guy who built the kingdom you're trying to rule. That I opened my laptop and logged into the Leoritech financial systems. Not the pretty dashboard that the board sees, not the simplified reports that get sent to investors. The real systems. The ones that actually control where the money goes. See? Here's something most people don't understand about modern businesses. Everything runs on access codes and permissions and digital signatures. You can't just walk into a bank with a briefcase and demand cash like some kind of movie villain. Everything is ones and zeros, passwords and protocols. And guess who designed all those protocols? Your boy Adrian. That's who I started with the corporate credit cards. Sophia's card, which she uses for everything from business lunches to personal shopping sprees. Frozen. Damien's company card, which somehow ended up linked to our expense system during some strategic partnership nonsense. Also frozen. Then I moved on to the operational accounts. The money we use for payroll, vendor payments, office expenses, basically everything that keeps Leoritech running on a day-to-day basis. I didn't freeze them, exactly. That would be nuclear. But I did implement what I like to call emergency financial protocols. Basically, any expense over $1,000 now requires my personal approval. Any transfer to external accounts needs my digital signature. Any attempt to access our reserve funds triggers a security review that goes straight to my phone. Is it petty? Maybe. Is it legal? Absolutely. Is it going to make Sophia's life very complicated very quickly? Oh, you bet your ass it is. My phone started lighting up like a Christmas tree. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails piling up faster than I could count. 20 missed calls became 40. 40 became 100. The notification sounds were so constant, it was like having a very angry cricket living in my pocket. I picked up the phone and looked at the caller ID. Sophia. 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 Damien. Elena, Sophia's assistant. Janet Cross, our CFO. Some number I didn't recognize. Sophia again. I flipped the phone face down and took another sip of my scotch. Here's the thing about scorched earth tactics. Once you start, you have to commit. You can't blow up the bridge and then complain that you can't get across the river. And right now, I was feeling very committed to some bridge burning. I pulled up our travel booking system and canceled the company's upcoming executive retreat to Aruba. The one Sophia had been planning for weeks. The one that was supposed to be a team-building exercise for senior management. Funny how team-building exercises always seem to happen in tropical locations with 5-star resorts. Gone. Cancelled. Refunded to the company account, which was now under my direct control. I canceled the catering contract for next week's investor presentation. The one with the artisanal cheese boards and champagne fountains that costs more than most people's annual salary. Gone. The premium parking spaces that Sophia had somehow convinced accounting were business necessities. Reverted to standard employee parking. The corporate membership to that exclusive gym downtown where she does networking lunches. Suspended pending review. By the time I was done, I'd systematically dismantled every perk, every convenience, every little luxury that Sophia had built into her corporate lifestyle. And the beautiful part? It was all completely legal, completely within my rights as majority owner, and completely devastating to someone who'd gotten used to living like a queen. My phone was still buzzing like an angry hornet. The number of missed calls had to be in the hundreds by now. But I just sat there, surrounded by the paperwork that proved I owned this empire, sipping my scotch and watching the city lights twinkle below. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting. Morning came with the kind of silence that feels dangerous. You know that moment in horror movies right before the killer jumps out? That's what my penthouse felt like at 7 a.m. No buzzing phone. I'd finally turned the damn thing off around 3 a.m. when the missed call count hit something like 347. No traffic noise filtering up from 34 floors below. Just me, my coffee machine, and the lingering taste of last night's scotch. I was halfway through my first cup of actually decent coffee. None of that green smoothie bullshit Sophia had tried to convert me to when the intercom crackled to life. Mr. Kwan, Patrick Delgado, the concierge, sounded like he was walking on eggshells. Patrick's worked this building for 15 years, seen everything from messy divorces to federal investigations, and he's got this professional poker face that could make a casino dealer jealous. But today, Today he sounded nervous. Yeah, Patrick, what's up? Sir, there's a young woman down here in the lobby. Says she works for your wife. I mean, Mrs. Monroe. Well, she looks pretty distressed, sir. Should I send her up? Elena Vargas. Had to be. Sophia's assistant, 26 years old, fresh out of NYU with a business degree and enough optimism to power a small city. Kid's been working for Sophia for 2 years, doing everything from scheduling meetings to picking up dry cleaning, and she genuinely believes she's learning from a visionary. Poor thing has no idea she's been working for a professional bullshit artist. Send her up, Patrick. Thanks. 5 minutes later, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Elena looked like she'd been hit by a truck. Her usually perfect makeup was streaked with mascara. Her blonde hair was doing this weird thing where it looked like she'd been running her hands through it all night, and she was clutching an overstuffed handbag like it contained the secrets of the universe. Mr. Kwan, she said, and her voice cracked like she was 13 years old. I'm so sorry to bother you, but something's wrong with the systems and I don't know what to do, and Ms. Monroe isn't answering her phone, and, Elena. I held up a hand. Breathe. Come in. She stumbled into my living room like a lost tourist, looking around at the minimalist furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows with the kind of awe that said she'd never been in a place that cost this much per square foot. Which, let's be honest, she probably hadn't. Coffee? I asked. Yes, please. Thank you. I haven't slept, and she collapsed onto my couch like her legs had given out. I poured her a mug and handed it over. She wrapped her hands around it like it was a life preserver. Okay, I said, settling into the chair across from her. What's going on? The floodgates opened. The payroll system is frozen, she said, words tumbling out like she'd been holding them in all night. Nobody got paid this morning. Not just the executives, nobody. The cleaning crew, the security guards, the junior developers. Jenny from accounting called me crying because her babysitter bounced, and she can't afford another one if she doesn't get paid today. She took a shaky breath and kept going. And the investor summit. The one next week with the Goldman Sachs people? The venue called and said our deposit got reversed. Something about insufficient funds, which doesn't make sense because we had $12 million in the operational account last week. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. Elena's eyes were getting wider and more panicked. And then Ms. Monroe's corporate card got declined. At Starbucks, Mr. Kwan. Starbucks. She was trying to buy coffee for her meeting with the venture capital firm from Boston, and her card got declined for a $6 latte. She called me screaming, but I don't understand what happened. I checked with the bank, and they said the account is under some kind of administrative hold. What about Damien's card? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Same thing. He tried to pay for lunch yesterday, some fancy place in Midtown, and his card got denied too. The restaurant manager had to come over and everything. It was so embarrassing. Damien called me personally, which never happens, and he was furious. He kept asking if there was some kind of system glitch. Elena set down her coffee mug and looked at me with those big, desperate eyes that people get when their world is falling apart and they can't figure out why. Mr. Kwan, is it a glitch? Because I've been up all night trying to figure out what went wrong, and I can't find anything. The systems look normal from my end, but nothing's working. It's like someone just turned everything off. I stood up and walked over to my desk, pulled out a cream-colored envelope with Elena's name written on it in my careful handwriting. I'd prepared it the night before, during my scotch-fueled strategic planning session. Elena, I said, handing her the envelope. I need you to give this to Sophia. Tell her she has 24 hours. She took the envelope with trembling hands. 24 hours for what? To resign as CEO, publicly acknowledge that I'm the founder and majority owner of Leoratech, and begin repaying the personal expenses she's charged to the company over the past 3 years. The amount comes to approximately $473,000. It's all itemized in the letter. Elena's face went white. Like vampire white. Mr. Kwan, I don't understand. Is this about yesterday? At the office. Smart kid. Smarter than I'd given her credit for. Elena, let me ask you something. Did you think it was normal? Your boss getting engaged to another man while her husband was standing in the lobby holding flowers. She looked down at her hands. I know, sir. I thought it was really weird. But Ms. Monroe said you two were separated, that you'd agreed to an amicable divorce, and that the engagement was just timing. Did she tell you that before or after I walked in? Elena's silence was answer enough. Here's the thing, Elena. Leoratech isn't our company. It's my company. I founded it. I built it. I own 83% of it. Sophia is an employee. A very well-paid employee, but an employee nonetheless. And as of yesterday, she became an employee who's breaching her fiduciary duty to the company and engaging in activities that directly harm shareholder interests. I sat back down and looked at this kid who was probably making 35 grand a year and living in a studio apartment in Queens, working 60-hour weeks for a boss who charges designer handbags to the company expense account. The system isn't glitched, Elena. The system is working exactly as I designed it to work. Every account freeze, every declined card, every suspended service. That's me protecting the company from further financial abuse. Elena stared at the envelope like it might bite her. Should I tell her it's not a glitch? Tell her the truth, I said. Tell her that her husband, ex-husband, whatever we're calling it now, isn't the pushover she thought he was. Tell her that actions have consequences, and that some bridges, once burned, don't get rebuilt. She stood up on unsteady legs, clutching the envelope in her oversized purse. What about payroll? What about the employees who didn't do anything wrong? Payroll will resume as soon as Sophia signs the resignation letter that's in that envelope. The employees will be fine. It's management that needs to worry. Elena nodded, but she looked like she was about to cry again. Mr. Kwan, I know this isn't my place, but are you okay? And that's when I realized something. This 26-year-old assistant, who probably couldn't afford health insurance, was the first person to ask me that question. Not Sophia, not the board members, not any of the people who were supposedly on my side. Just Elena, who was stuck in the middle of a war she didn't start. I'm fine, Elena. Better than fine, actually. For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. She walked to the door, then turned back. For what it's worth, Mr. Kwan, I always thought you were the real genius behind Leoratech. Ms. Monroe talks a good game, but you're the one who actually makes things work. Smart kid. Really smart kid. After she left, I poured myself another cup of coffee and watched the city wake up 34 floors below. Somewhere out there, Sophia was about to get a very unpleasant surprise that I couldn't wait. Here's something they don't tell you about declaring war on your wife. The waiting is the worst part. It's like sitting in a doctor's office, except instead of finding out if that weird mole is cancerous, you're waiting to see how spectacularly your marriage is going to explode. That I spent most of the day doing what I do best, working. Locked myself in my home office, reviewed patent applications, analyzed market reports, basically anything that required enough brain power to keep me from obsessing over whatever nuclear meltdown was happening at Leoratech headquarters. My phone stayed off. The landline stayed unplugged. For all intents and purposes, Adrian Kwan had vanished from the face of the earth. Around 6 p.m., I ordered Thai food from that place on Columbus that doesn't care if you're worth $500 million or living paycheck to paycheck. They just make really good pad Thai and leave you alone. I ate dinner watching the sunset paint Manhattan in shades of orange and gold, trying to pretend this was just another Tuesday instead of the day I nuked my life from orbit. But by 11 p.m., I was pacing. 34 floors up, with a view that real estate agents call commanding, and I felt like a caged animal. The city spread out below me like a circuit board, all lights and patterns and logic, but up here in my ivory tower, nothing made sense anymore. That's when the pounding started. Not a polite knock. Not a doorbell. Actual pounding, like someone was trying to break down my door with their bare fists. The kind of desperate hammering that says emergency or police raid or ex-wife having a complete mental breakdown. I checked my watch. 11:45 p.m. Classy. Through the peephole, I could see her. Sophia Monroe, though I guess technically she was still Sophia Kwan for another few hours, standing in my hallway looking like she'd been through a blender. Her usually perfect makeup was streaked down her cheeks in black rivers. Her hair, which normally looked like she'd just stepped out of a salon, was doing this wild thing where half of it had escaped whatever she'd used to hold it back. And she was still wearing that engagement ring, the diamond catching the hallway light like a tiny spotlight announcing her betrayal. But here's the thing that really got me. She looked small. Sophia's never been tall, but she's got this presence that makes her seem bigger than she actually is. Command presence, they call it in the military. The ability to walk into a room, and have everyone automatically assume you're in charge. Tonight? Tonight, she looked like a lost kid who'd wandered away from her parents at the mall. I opened the door. Please, Adrian, she whispered, and her voice was this broken thing that didn't sound anything like the confident CEO who'd been giving TED Talks and gracing magazine covers. Don't do this. I leaned against the doorframe, not inviting her in, not closing the door. Just watching this woman I'd been married to for 7 years fall apart in my hallway. Don't do what exactly? You know what? She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, and I noticed her mascara had left black smudges on her sleeve. The accounts, the cards, the payroll. Elena told me about the letter. Oh, so you got my terms. They're insane, Adrian. $473,000? For business expenses? I almost laughed. Business expenses? Sophia, you charged a weekend at the Four Seasons to the company because you said you needed to recharge your creative energy. You bought a $12,000 handbag and claimed it was a networking tool. You hired a personal trainer and called it executive wellness. Those were legitimate. The fuck they were. The profanity just slipped out, and Sophia actually flinched. I don't curse much, never saw the point, but sometimes a situation calls for precision language. You've been treating Leoratech like your personal piggy bank for 3 years, and now you're pissed that someone finally noticed. She stepped closer, and I could smell her perfume. That expensive stuff that costs more per ounce than most people make in a day. It used to drive me crazy in a good way. Now it just made me tired. This isn't about the money, she said. This is about yesterday. About Damien. Is it? I know how it looked, but you don't understand the situation. We were going to tell you. The engagement was it was supposed to be temporary. A business arrangement. Now I did laugh, and it came out harsh and bitter. A business arrangement. Right. Is that what you call making out with another man in front of half our employees? Her face crumpled. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Damien was supposed to propose quietly, and then we were going to use the engagement to leverage the merger talks with his company. It was strategic, Adrian. You know how these things work. Strategic. I repeated the word like it tasted bad. You got engaged to another man as a business strategy. It wasn't real. The engagement wasn't real. It was a way to test you. And there it was. The line that made me want to put my fist through the wall. Test me? Test me how exactly? To see if you'd fight for me. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been practicing them. To see if you still cared enough to get angry, to make a scene, to do something. Anything. We've been drifting apart for months, Adrian. You work 18-hour days. You barely talk to me. You act like I'm just another employee instead of your wife. I thought if I made you jealous, if I made you think you were losing me, maybe you'd remember why you married me in the first place. I stared at her for a long moment, processing this information. My wife had gotten engaged to another man to test my devotion. My wife had humiliated me in front of our entire company because she wanted to see if I cared enough to fight back. Well, I said finally, congratulations. You tested me. And now you know exactly how much fight I have left. Adrian, please. You know what the really fucked up part is, Sophia? If you just talked to me, if you just said, hey, I feel like we're growing apart. Maybe we should work on our marriage. I would have listened. I would have made changes. I would have fought for us. I pushed off from the doorframe and took a step back into my apartment. But you didn't do that. You decided to play games. You decided to manipulate me, to humiliate me, to test me like I was some kind of lab rat. And then you want to stand here and tell me it wasn't real. The engagement wasn't real, but the feelings, stop. I held up a hand. Just stop. You want to know what's real? This conversation is real. That ring on your finger is real. The fact that you're standing in my hallway at midnight crying about consequences is real. She looked down at the engagement ring like she'd forgotten it was there. I could give it back. I could make a public statement, say it was all a misunderstanding. We could use this, Adrian. We could use the drama to generate publicity for the company. People love a good redemption story. Jesus Christ, Sophia. Even now, even standing here with your marriage falling apart, you're thinking about publicity angles. It's what I do. It's who I am. No, I said. It's who you've become. And it's not someone I want to be married to anymore. She started crying harder then. These ugly, choking sobs that probably would have broken my heart yesterday. Today they just made me tired. I'll sign your letter, she whispered. I'll resign. I'll pay back the money. I'll do whatever you want. Just, just don't end us like this. Not over a stupid mistake. I looked at this woman who'd shared my bed for 7 years, who knew how I liked my coffee and which side of the bed I preferred, and the fact that I talk in my sleep when I'm stressed. This woman who'd just admitted to orchestrating an elaborate psychological manipulation because she thought it would be more effective than having an honest conversation. It's already ended, Sophia. This is just the paperwork. I started to close the door, then stopped. Oh, and Sophia, next time you want to test someone's love, maybe don't do it in front of a crowd with cameras. Some things can't be undone, no matter how sorry you are afterward. I closed the door and turned the deadbolt. Behind me, I could hear her sobbing in the hallway for a few more minutes before the sound of her heels clicking away toward the elevator. I poured myself another scotch and stood at the window, looking out at the city that never sleeps. Tomorrow was going to be interesting. Here's something they don't teach you in business school. The best boardroom battles aren't won with PowerPoint presentations or market analysis. They're won by the guy who controls the money and has the biggest set of balls. And this morning, wearing a navy Tom Ford suit and the tie Sophia gave me for our 3rd anniversary, poetic irony at its finest, I was about to remind 12 very important people exactly who owns this circus. The Leoratech boardroom is one of those intimidating spaces designed to make people feel like they're conducting serious business. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls that overlook Manhattan, a conference table that probably cost more than most people's houses, and enough chrome and leather to outfit a luxury car dealership. The kind of room where billion-dollar deals get made and careers get destroyed, sometimes in the same conversation that I walked in at exactly 9 a.m., because punctuality is power, and surveyed my audience. 12 directors sat around that massive table like nervous disciples waiting for their messiah to show up. Janet Cross, our CFO, was clicking her pen in that rapid-fire pattern she does when she's stressed. Click, 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 pause. Click, 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 pause. Like a nervous metronome counting down to disaster. Marcus Webb, our lead investor from Goldman Sachs, was scrolling through his phone with the kind of focused intensity that said he was probably reading very unflattering articles about us. Dr. Patricia Huang, our head of R&D, looked like she hadn't slept in days. And sitting at the far end of the table, looking like she'd been dressed by a team of crisis management consultants, was my soon-to-be ex-wife. Sophia had pulled herself together since last night's hallway breakdown. Perfect makeup hiding the evidence of her midnight crying session, hair styled within an inch of its life, and a conservative black suit that screamed, responsible executive having a very bad week. She was clutching a manila envelope like it contained her last will and testament, which, come to think of it, it basically did. I took my seat at the head of the table. Because yes, I sit at the head of the table, because I own 83% of this company, and looked around the room with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you hold all the cards. Good morning, I said, setting my own folder on the table. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I know yesterday's events have raised some questions, and I thought it was time we cleared the air. Marcus Webb cleared his throat. Adrian, we need to discuss the operational issues. The payroll freeze, the suspended accounts, the canceled investor summit. Our portfolio companies don't typically. Before we get to that, I interrupted, I think we need to establish some basic facts about Leoratech's ownership structure and leadership hierarchy. There seems to be some confusion in the market. I opened my folder and pulled out the incorporation documents, spreading them across the table like I was dealing cards. Leoratech was founded 7 years ago by me, Adrian Kwan. I provided the initial capital, developed the core technology, and filed all the foundational patents. I currently own 83% of the company. Dr. Huang leaned forward. Adrian, we all know you're the majority shareholder, but do we? I turned to face the board. Because yesterday I watched TechCrunch publish an article calling Sophia the visionary behind Leoratech's revolutionary platform. Last month, Forbes profiled her as the CEO who's redefining enterprise software. And 3 weeks ago, she gave a keynote at the Digital Innovation Summit where she talked about her company and her vision for the future. The pen clicking stopped. Janet's face had gone pale. Now, I understand that Sophia has been an excellent public face for the company. She's articulate, charismatic, and very good at explaining complex technology to people who don't understand it. But there's a difference between being a spokesperson and being a founder. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard. Because yes, we have a whiteboard in our fancy boardroom. Because sometimes you need to draw pictures for people who make millions of dollars but can't grasp basic concepts. Let me break this down in terms everyone can understand. I grabbed a marker and started writing numbers. Leoratech generated $1.2 billion in revenue last year. Of that, approximately $900 million came directly from licenses and implementations of patents that I developed and filed. Another $200 million came from consulting services based on proprietary algorithms that I created. The remaining $100 million came from various partnerships and integrations. More numbers went on the board. In the same period, Leoratech spent $557 million on operations. Of that, $340 million went to legitimate business expenses, salaries, equipment, office space, actual business development. The remaining $217 million went to what I generously call executive lifestyle management. I turned back to the board. Artisanal coffee bars in every office. A corporate jet that's used more for weekend getaways than business travel. Executive retreats to tropical locations where the most strenuous activity is poolside networking. A marketing budget that's somehow larger than our R&D budget, despite the fact that our technology sells itself. Marcus was scribbling notes furiously. Dr. Huang looked like she was doing math in her head and not liking the results. Now, I continued, let's talk about yesterday's events. At approximately 9:15 a.m., while I was attempting to surprise my wife with Valentine's gifts, I discovered that she had become engaged to Damien Locke, CEO of Nexus Dynamics, our primary competitor. This engagement was announced publicly, in our lobby, in front of our employees, and was recorded by multiple devices. The silence in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. As majority owner, and as someone with a fiduciary duty to protect shareholder interests, I immediately implemented emergency financial protocols to prevent any potential conflicts of interest or misuse of company resources. These protocols will remain in place until we can ensure that Leoratech's interests are being protected. I walked back to my seat but didn't sit down. Power move. Force everyone to look up at you. Which brings us to today's agenda item. I nodded toward Sophia. The resignation of our current CEO and the appointment of new leadership. Sophia stood up slowly, still clutching that manila envelope. When she spoke, her voice sounded like broken glass trying to form words. I, Sophia Monroe, hereby resign as Chief Executive Officer of Leoratech, effective immediately. She opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I also want to make a public statement acknowledging that Adrian Kwan is the founder, majority owner, and true architect of Leoratech's success. I have served as the public face of the company, but I was never its creator or visionary. She set the paper on the table like she was placing flowers on a grave. I take full responsibility for any confusion about the company's leadership structure, and I apologize to the board, our employees, and our investors for any damage my actions may have caused. The confession landed like a nuclear bomb in the middle of that pristine boardroom. Marcus Webb actually dropped his pen. Dr. Huang's mouth fell open. Janet was staring at the paper like it might spontaneously combust. Furthermore, Sophia continued, I acknowledge that certain personal expenses may have been inappropriately charged to company accounts, and I commit to working with our financial team to identify and repay any such charges. She sat down heavily, like her legs had given out. I let the silence stretch for a full 30 seconds before speaking. Thank you, Sophia. I accept your resignation. I turned to the board. I'm assuming the role of CEO and Financial Oversight Director, effective immediately. Any expenditures over $10,000 will require my personal approval. Any contracts or partnerships will require board review. Any public statements about company direction or strategy will come through me. Dr. Huang raised her hand like she was in school. What about Damien Locke? What about Nexus Dynamics? Damien Locke is permanently banned from any involvement with Leoratech business. Any existing partnerships or collaborations with Nexus Dynamics are terminated as of today. We'll honor existing contracts, but there will be no new agreements. Marcus finally found his voice. Adrian, this is a significant change in leadership structure. The investors will want to see a transition plan, stability metrics. The investors, I said, sitting down and folding my hands, will get exactly what they've always wanted. a company run by the person who actually built it. Leoratech just became a lot more stable, not less. I looked around the table at 12 very expensive people who were slowly realizing that their understanding of this company had been fundamentally wrong for 7 years. Any other questions? The silence told me everything I needed to know. Good. Let's get to work. You know what's funny about crisis management consultants? They're like interior decorators for disasters. They want everything to look pretty and coordinated, even when your life is burning down around you. Which is why, 3 hours after my boardroom coup, I was sitting in a cramped conference room with 2 overpaid PR specialists who kept using phrases like narrative control and reputation rehabilitation. "We need to soften this," said Miranda Cole, a 40-something blonde who probably charged more per hour than most people make in a month. She was wearing one of those power suits that screams, "I went to Wharton and I want you to know it." And she'd been talking nonstop for 20 minutes about messaging strategy. Soften what exactly? I asked, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. The whole situation, the divorce, the engagement, the leadership change. Right now it looks like a soap opera. We need to make it look like a carefully planned transition. Her partner, some guy named Brad who looked like he'd stepped out of a men's magazine and talked like he'd swallowed a marketing textbook, nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. We craft a narrative about natural evolution, mutual respect, amicable separation. Make Sophia look like a visionary who's stepping back to pursue new opportunities. I looked at these two and wondered if they'd been dropped on their heads as children. "Let me get this straight," I said. "You want me to lie? You want me to pretend that my wife didn't publicly humiliate me, didn't embezzle company funds, and didn't get engaged to our biggest competitor while I was standing in the lobby holding flowers?" Miranda leaned forward with the kind of earnest expression that probably worked on naive startup founders. "We want you to control the narrative before someone else does. Right now, you look like a vengeful ex-husband who's using his business position to punish his wife. That's not good for anyone." "I am a vengeful ex-husband using my business position to punish my wife," I said. "That's literally exactly what's happening here. Why would I pretend otherwise?" Brad jumped in with his consultant voice. "Because perception is reality in the business world, Adrian. It doesn't matter what actually happened. It matters what people think happened." I stared at him for a long moment, then stood up and walked to the window. We were in one of those generic conference rooms that corporate lawyers love: beige walls, fluorescent lighting, furniture that looks like it was designed by a committee of accountants. The kind of place where souls go to die. "You know what?" I said, turning back to face them. "You're fired." Miranda blinked. "Excuse me. You're fired. Both of you. Send me your bill, and don't let the door hit you on the way out." They gathered their laptops and their dignity and left without another word. Crisis management consultants might be expensive, but they know when they've been dismissed. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a coffee shop on the Upper West Side that didn't care if I was worth $500 million or living paycheck to paycheck. Just black coffee, worn leather chairs, and the kind of anonymity you can only find in a city of 8 million people. Sophia walked in looking like she was going to her own execution. Gone was the power suit from the boardroom. Instead, she was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, no makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes. She looked like the woman I'd married 7 years ago, before the magazine covers and TED Talks and executive lifestyle management. She sat down across from me without ordering anything. "The PR people said you fired them," she said. "Yep. Why?" "Because they wanted me to lie about what happened. And I'm done lying." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse and slid it across the table. "I wrote a statement. For the press release." I unfolded it and read. It was exactly the kind of corporate poetry that Miranda and Brad would have loved. Phrases like mutual decision to pursue separate paths and deep respect for our shared accomplishments, an exciting new chapter in both our personal and professional lives. Pure, grade A bullshit that I folded the paper back up and handed it to her. "No, Adrian, no. I'm not signing off on some fairy tale that makes you look like a visionary and me look like a supportive partner. That's not what happened." I pulled out my phone and opened a new note. "Here's what we're going to say." I started typing, reading aloud as I wrote. "Leoratech announces a change in leadership structure, effective immediately. Adrian Kwan, founder and majority owner of Leoratech, has assumed the role of Chief Executive Officer. Sophia Monroe has resigned from her position as CEO to pursue other opportunities. Sophia was shaking her head. That makes me sound like I was fired. You were fired. By your husband, for sleeping with the competition. But I'm being generous and calling it a resignation. Adrian, please. I held up a hand and kept typing. Mr. Kwon founded Leoratech 7 years ago and has been the primary architect of its technology platform and business strategy. Ms. Monroe served as the public face of the company during its growth phase. The transition reflects Leoratech's evolution into a more technically focused organization under its founder's direct leadership. I looked up at her. That's it. Simple, factual, and true. It doesn't explain anything. People are going to ask questions. Let them ask. The truth isn't complicated, Sophia. You got caught embezzling and cheating, and now you're facing consequences. Everything else is just noise. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. What about the engagement? What about Damien? What about him? People saw the video. It's all over social media. They're going to want to know how that fits into the timeline. I shrugged. That's between you and Damien. Leoratech's statement is about Leoratech business. Your personal life is your personal problem. But if you don't address it, people are going to assume what actually happened. That my wife got engaged to another man while she was still married to me, and that I responded by taking control of the company I built, which is exactly what happened. I finished typing and showed her the screen. This goes out at 5 p.m. today. You can issue your own statement if you want to explain yourself, but this is Leoratech's official position. She read it again, her face getting paler with each word. This is going to destroy my reputation. Your reputation destroyed itself yesterday morning. I'm just declining to help rebuild it. Adrian, I know you're angry. I'm not angry anymore, I said, and realized it was true. I was angry last night. This morning I was furious. But right now? Right now I'm just tired. Tired of pretending, tired of letting you take credit for my work, tired of being the technical guy while you play CEO. I stood up and left a 20 on the table for coffee I hadn't finished. The statement goes out at 5. If you want to add anything, you've got until 4:30. What if I refuse to sign it? Then it goes out without your signature. And tomorrow I start talking to journalists about the $473,000 in fraudulent expenses. Your choice. I walked out of that coffee shop and into the afternoon Manhattan chaos, leaving my soon-to-be ex-wife sitting alone with a statement that told the truth for the first time in years. It's exactly 5 p.m. The press release went live. By 5:30, my phone was ringing off the hook with interview requests. By 6 p.m., TechCrunch had posted an article calling me the hidden genius behind Leoratech's success. By 8 p.m., Forbes wanted to do a cover story. Sophia's phone, I imagined, had gone very quiet very quickly. Funny how the truth works that way. You know what nobody tells you about becoming suddenly famous in the tech world? Everyone wants a piece of you, and 90% of them are complete vultures. 2 weeks after my press release turned Leoratech's leadership structure upside down, I was sitting in meetings with venture capitalists who pronounced my name wrong, startup founders who wanted me to validate their half-baked ideas, and reporters who kept asking if I was okay after my very public divorce. But then, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, I got an email that actually made me sit up and pay attention. Mr. Kwon. It began, my name is Layla Park, and 6 months ago your ex-wife told me my idea was interesting but not commercially viable. I think she was wrong. Would you be willing to give me 30 minutes to prove it? Attached was a pitch deck for something called Neuron Layer, an AI platform that could analyze emotional nuance in real-time communication. Not the usual AI will solve everything bullshit that every startup was peddling, but actual technical innovation with real-world applications that I'd never heard of. Layla Park, which was intriguing. In the tech world, especially in New York, everyone knows everyone, or at least pretends to. But this woman had somehow stayed under my radar while building something that looked genuinely revolutionary. I emailed back. Thursday, 2 p.m. My office. But then I changed my mind. Leoratech's offices were still too connected to Sophia, too full of champagne fountains and artisanal coffee bars, and the lingering scent of executive lifestyle management. If I was going to look at something real, something new, I wanted to do it somewhere that felt authentic, which is how I found myself standing in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, breathing air that smelled like coffee beans and machine oil, and the particular energy that comes from people actually building things instead of just talking about building things. Layla Park turned out to be 27 years old, 5'0", with the kind of focused intensity that made you pay attention even when she was just shaking your hand. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt that had actual coffee stains on it, not the kind of carefully curated casual that tech executives wear to prove they're one of the people, but the real thing. The uniform of someone who'd been coding for 18 hours straight and forgotten that food exists. "Mr. Kwan," she said, leading me through a space that was part office, part laboratory, part controlled chaos. "Thank you for coming out here. I know it's not exactly Manhattan corporate." "That's exactly why I wanted to come here," I said, looking around at workstations that were obviously built for function over form, whiteboards covered in actual equations instead of marketing slogans, and a coffee setup that involved a single, ancient machine instead of a barista who charged more per latte than most people make in an hour. The team was small. Maybe 15 people, all young, all looking like they'd rather be coding than eating or sleeping or dealing with whatever existential crisis was currently trending on social media. The kind of people who built things because they couldn't help themselves, not because they wanted to get rich and famous. "Show me what you've got," I said. Layla walked me over to a workstation where 3 monitors displayed what looked like a conversation analysis in real time. Traditional AI can parse language for keywords, sentiment, basic emotional indicators, she explained, her hands moving as she talked. But it misses the nuance. The difference between genuine enthusiasm and polite agreement. The gap between what someone says and what they actually mean. She pulled up a demo, a customer service chat where the AI was analyzing not just the words being typed, but the rhythm of the typing, the pause patterns, the subtle linguistic choices that revealed frustration, confusion, genuine satisfaction. "This is a live customer service interaction," she said. "Watch the emotional mapping." On the screen, colors shifted and flowed as the conversation progressed. Green for genuine satisfaction, yellow for mild confusion, red for building frustration. But more than that, the AI was tracking micro-patterns, identifying the exact moment when a customer went from slightly annoyed to ready to cancel their subscription. "Jesus," I said, because sometimes technical elegance just hits you in the gut. You're reading between the lines in real time. Exactly. And not just in customer service. Imagine this in therapy sessions, helping therapists identify when a patient is minimizing their problems. In negotiations, helping lawyers understand when the other side is bluffing. In education, helping teachers know when a student is genuinely confused versus just not paying attention. I watched the demo run through scenario after scenario, and each one made more sense than the last. This wasn't some pie-in-the-sky AI fantasy. This was practical, immediate, useful technology that could be implemented tomorrow. "What did Sophia say when you pitched this?" I asked. Layla's expression darkened. She said emotional intelligence couldn't be quantified, that the technology was interesting but not commercially viable, and that Leoratech was focused on more scalable solutions. Then she spent 20 minutes telling me about some champagne fountain they were installing in the executive conference room. I laughed, not the bitter laugh I'd been doing a lot of lately, but actual amusement. Yeah, that sounds like Sophia. She never understood that the best technology solves real problems instead of creating pretty presentations. "The thing is," Layla continued, "I know this works. We've been running pilots with 3 companies for 6 months. Customer satisfaction is up 30%, employee retention is up 20%, and one of our pilot companies increased their sales conversion rate by 45% just by understanding emotional context in their client interactions." She pulled out a tablet and showed me the metrics. Real numbers, real results, real impact. The kind of data that made investors write checks and competitors start panicking. "What do you need?" I asked. "Funding to scale the platform, partnerships with companies that actually want to solve problems, and a board seat for someone who understands that technology should make people's lives better, not just make PowerPoint presentations look impressive." I looked around the warehouse again, at the team of brilliant kids who were building something that could change how humans communicate, at the workstations that prioritized function over form, at the energy of people who believe they could actually make the world better through code. 25 million for 40% and a board seat, I said, Layla blinked. What? $25 million for 40% equity and a board seat. Standard terms. I'll have my lawyers draft the paperwork by Friday. The warehouse went quiet. Not the nervous quiet of people afraid they're about to get fired, but the stunned quiet of people who've just realized their dreams are about to become reality. Mr. Kwan, Layla said, are you serious? Dead serious. But I have conditions. Her face got cautious. What kind of conditions? No champagne fountains. No artisanal coffee bars. No executive retreats to tropical locations. No marble lobbies or ice sculptures or any of the bullshit that turns a tech company into a lifestyle brand. You keep doing what you're doing, building things that matter. The team erupted in cheers. Someone might have actually cried. Diego Ramos, one of the senior engineers who'd somehow escaped the Leoratech corporate culture wars, was grinning like he'd won the lottery. Also, I added, you're hiring Elena Vargas as your operations manager. She's been working for people who don't appreciate intelligence and dedication. I think she'd fit in better here. As I walked back to my car, leaving behind a warehouse full of brilliant people who were about to change the world, I realized something. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something real instead of just managing something pretty. Sophia could keep her champagne fountains. I had something better. I had the future. Here's something nobody tells you about being worth $500 million. Eventually, you realize that marble countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows and views that make real estate agents weep don't actually make you happy. They just make you expensive. Which is why, 6 weeks after nuking my marriage and taking back my company, I was standing in the empty penthouse that used to be my home, watching movers wrap my life in bubble wrap and cardboard. The penthouse had been Sophia's idea, of course. We need a space that reflects our success, she'd said, which translated to, I want a place that makes other people jealous when they see it on Instagram. 34 floors above Manhattan, 3,000 square feet of aggressively modern design, and enough marble to outfit a small mausoleum. The kind of place where you're afraid to put your feet up because everything costs more than most people's cars. But as I watched the movers tape up boxes and dismantle furniture that I'd never actually liked, I felt lighter. Like I was shedding skin that had never quite fit right. Sir, one of the movers, a guy named Carlos who'd been doing this job for 20 years and had the arms to prove it, gestured toward the kitchen. What about the espresso machine? I looked at the chrome monstrosity that took up half the counter space and required a PhD in mechanical engineering to operate. Sophia had bought it because some lifestyle blogger said it was essential for the modern executive. I'd used it maybe twice, and both times I'd ended up just going to the deli downstairs for actual coffee. Leave it, I said. The new owners can figure out what to do with it. 3 hours later, I was standing in what was about to become my new home, a 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side that cost about 1/10 of what the penthouse had been worth. Hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places, windows that actually opened, and a kitchen where you could make coffee without a computer science degree. The building was one of those pre-war places that had actual character instead of designer character. My neighbors weren't investment bankers or corporate lawyers or people who introduced themselves by mentioning their net worth. They were teachers and artists and grad students and people who held the elevator for strangers and said, thank you, when you did the same. Mrs. Chen from 4B brought me homemade dumplings on my first day. Welcome to the building, she said, like it was perfectly normal to feed your neighbors instead of pretending they didn't exist. When I told her I was between jobs, technically true, she didn't ask what I did before or how much money I made. She just said the dumplings were better reheated in a pan, not the microwave. That first night, sitting on my couch, an actual comfortable couch, not some designer torture device that looked good in magazines. Eating Mrs. Chen's dumplings and listening to the sounds of people living actual lives instead of performing success, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace, which is probably why, when Columbia University called 3 days later, I didn't hang up immediately. Mr. Kwan, said Dr. Margaret Torres, chair of the computer science department, we'd like to offer you a visiting professorship. 1 class per semester, graduate level, focus on practical applications of emerging technologies. Teaching. When was the last time I'd thought about teaching? Probably never, if I'm being honest. My career had been about building things, selling things, scaling things. The idea of standing in front of a classroom, and actually explaining concepts instead of just implementing them felt completely foreign. What would I be teaching? I asked. Whatever you want. Your expertise in AI implementation, your experience with large-scale system architecture, your insights into turning research into viable products. The students need to hear from someone who's actually built things instead of just studying them. I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. I'll do it. 2 weeks later, I was standing in front of 23 graduate students who looked like they'd been living on coffee and determination for the past 6 months. Which, let's be honest, they probably had. Graduate school in computer science is basically an endurance test disguised as education. Good morning, I said, looking out at faces that ranged from cautiously optimistic to completely exhausted. I'm Adrian Kwan, and before we start, let me tell you what this class isn't going to be about. I wrote on the whiteboard. Yes, an actual whiteboard, not some fancy digital display. Theory without application. Code without purpose. Innovation without impact. This class is about building things that matter. Not building things that look impressive on your resume or make investors write checks, but building things that actually solve real problems for real people. A hand shot up. Student in the back row, wearing a hoodie that had definitely seen better days. Professor Kwan, what's the difference between innovation and impact? Good question. I pointed to her. What's your name? Arya Nguyen. Arya, how many of you have spent the last semester working on projects that you know will never be used by anyone except your professors? About half the hands in the room went up. Honest kids, that's innovation without impact. You're solving theoretical problems with elegant solutions that will live and die in academic papers. Nothing wrong with that, but it's not what this class is about. I walked over to the window, looked out at the campus where students were hurrying between classes, probably stressing about deadlines and job interviews, and whether they'd ever actually use anything they were learning. Impact is when a 30-year-old single mother in Detroit uses your software to manage her small business more efficiently, so she can spend more time with her kids. Impact is when a therapist in rural Montana can better understand their patients because your AI helps them recognize emotional patterns they might have missed. Impact is when technology makes someone's life genuinely better, not just more convenient. Another hand. This one from a tall kid in the front row who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Tund Okafor, he said, introducing himself with a slight Nigerian accent. How do you balance impact with profitability? I mean, helping people is great, but companies need to make money to survive. Smart question. The kind that showed he was thinking beyond the classroom. Tund, here's something the business world doesn't want you to know. The most profitable companies are usually the ones that solve real problems really well. Everything else is just marketing. I spent the next hour talking about neuron layer, about identifying genuine needs versus manufactured ones, about the difference between building technology that improves people's lives and building technology that just makes their problems more expensive. After class, Arya and Tund stayed behind. Professor Kwan, Arya said, that single mother in Detroit you mentioned, is that a real example? Not yet, I said, but it could be. That's what we're going to work on this semester. Tund was taking notes in a worn notebook that looked like it had survived several academic wars. You really think we can build something that matters? I don't think you can, I said. I know you can. The question is whether you want to. Walking home that evening, past the Korean restaurant where the owner remembered how I liked my bulgogi, past the bookstore where they knew I was working my way through their entire philosophy section, past the park where kids played pickup basketball and nobody cared what anyone did for a living, I realized something. This was what success actually looked like. Not marble countertops or champagne fountains or magazine covers. Just people doing meaningful work, treating each other with basic human decency, and building things that made the world a little bit better. My phone buzzed. Text message from Elena, who was settling in beautifully at Neuron Layer. The Microsoft deal went through. Layla says to tell you the team wants to take you out to celebrate. Somewhere with actual food, not a networking event. I smiled and typed back. I know just the place. Living quietly, it turns out, is a skill. For the first time in maybe a decade, I wasn't checking my phone every 30 seconds or scheduling meetings that could have been emails or pretending to care about quarterly projections that were really just elaborate guessing games. Instead, I was grading papers from students who actually wanted to learn something. drinking coffee that came from a machine I could operate without an engineering degree, and discovering that Manhattan has actual neighborhoods where people know each other's names. 6 months after the Great Leoritech implosion, my life had settled into something that felt suspiciously like contentment. Teach Tuesday and Thursday mornings, spend afternoons working with Layla's team on projects that might actually change the world, evenings reading books that had nothing to do with business strategy or market disruption or any of the other buzzwords that pass for wisdom in corporate America. I was sitting in my favorite chair, an actual comfortable chair that I'd bought because it was comfortable, not because it would look good in photos, reading a biography of Richard Feynman and thinking about how to explain quantum computing to graduate students when the doorbell rang. The mail carrier, a woman named Rosa who'd been delivering to this building for 15 years and knew everyone's coffee preferences, handed me a stack of bills and catalogs and one envelope that made me stop in the hallway. Cream-colored paper, expensive weight, handwritten address in careful script. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. 7 years of marriage teaches you things like that. Sophia. I stood there for a long moment, holding that letter like it might explode. Part of me wanted to throw it away unopened, let whatever she had to say disappear into the New York City waste management system along with all the other garbage. But curiosity won out, like it usually does. Back in my apartment, I opened the envelope carefully, because apparently I'm the kind of person who still respects good stationery, even when it comes from people who've betrayed me. The letter was 3 pages long, written in the same careful script on matching paper. Real paper, the kind that costs more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. Even in exile, Sophia maintained her standards. Adrian, I don't expect you to read this, but I needed to write it. Therapy. Yes, I'm in therapy now. Dr. Miranda Castellanos in Portland, if you're wondering, says that sometimes we need to say things out loud, even if the other person never hears them. But I'm hoping you'll hear this that I'm in Portland now. Teaching coding to kids who can't afford computers, working with a nonprofit that refurbishes old laptops and gets them to families who need them. It's not glamorous work. There are no magazine covers or TED Talks or networking events with artisanal cheese boards. Just kids who want to learn and computers that crash more often than they work, and the kind of satisfaction that doesn't photograph well for Instagram, that I had to stop reading and pour myself a cup of coffee. Portland. Teaching kids. The woman who used to complain about flying commercial was now apparently working with nonprofit organizations and refurbished computers. The funny thing is, I'm good at it. Not good at teaching. I'm still learning that part, but good at connecting with these kids. They don't care that I used to be on magazine covers or that I know how to work a room full of investors. They care that I can show them how to write code that does something useful, how to solve problems that matter to them. Last week, a 15-year-old named Marcus built an app that helps his grandmother track her medications. Nothing fancy, just a simple reminder system with a user interface designed for someone with arthritis. It's not going to change the world or make anyone rich, but it's going to help one person live a little easier. And watching Marcus demo it to the class, seeing how proud he was of building something that mattered, I understood something I should have figured out years ago. You tried to teach me this, didn't you? The difference between being important and being authentic. Between building things that look impressive and building things that actually work. Between performing success and actually achieving it. I set the letter down and walked to the window. Outside, Mrs. Chun was tending to the small garden she'd somehow convinced the building management to let her plant in the courtyard. Nothing fancy, just tomatoes and herbs and flowers that made the space feel alive instead of just functional. I know this doesn't excuse what I did. I know saying sorry doesn't undo the humiliation or the betrayal or the fact that I spent 3 years treating your company like my personal piggy bank. I know that getting engaged to Damien while you were standing in the lobby with flowers is probably the most selfish, cruel thing I've ever done to another human being. But I want you to know that it wasn't calculated. It wasn't some master plan to hurt you or steal your company or manipulate the situation to my advantage. It was just stupidity. The kind of stupidity that comes from believing your own press releases, from thinking that the character you play in public is the same as the person you actually are. Damien and I lasted exactly 6 weeks after you froze the accounts. Turns out that a relationship built on mutual ambition and strategic networking doesn't hold up well when one person becomes a cautionary tale and the other person realizes they're dating someone with no actual skills. He's moved on to someone who can actually help his career. I've moved on to kids who think coding is magic. I laughed despite myself. 6 weeks. Their great romance, their strategic partnership, their whatever the hell it was had lasted 6 weeks once the money and the glamour and the mutual benefit disappeared. That I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect us to be friends or to have coffee and catch up on old times. I don't even expect you to finish reading this letter. But I wanted you to know that your example, your actual example, not the version of you I created in my head to justify my behavior, has been haunting me for 6 months. Every time one of these kids shows me something they've built, every time I see genuine excitement about solving a real problem instead of impressing an audience, I think about you standing in that boardroom, calmly explaining the difference between creating value and performing success. I think about all the times you tried to show me that same difference, and how I was too busy playing CEO to notice that. I hope you're building things that matter. I hope you're working with people who appreciate your brain instead of just your bank account. I hope you found the kind of satisfaction that doesn't need an audience to validate it. That I hope you're happy. Sophia.p.s. Elena sent me pictures of the Neuron Layer launch event. It looks like everything Leoratech should have been. People who care about the work more than the party. I'm glad you found them. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. Outside, the afternoon light was starting to fade, and I could hear the sounds of people coming home from work, kids playing in the courtyard, the gentle chaos of a neighborhood where people actually lived instead of just existing. The truth was, I didn't know how I felt about Sophia's letter. Angry? Relieved? Sad? Maybe all of those things, or maybe none of them. Maybe the most honest response was just acknowledgement. She'd said what she needed to say, and I'd heard it. And that was enough. I filed the letter in my desk drawer, next to the incorporation papers for Leoratech and the patent documents and all the other artifacts of a life I used to live. Not because I was keeping it as evidence or planning to frame it or anything dramatic like that. Just because some things deserve to be preserved, even when you're not sure. WHY.my phone buzzed. Text from Tund, my star student who was working on an AI system to help small farmers optimize crop rotation. Professor Kwan, the Ghana pilot program results are in. 23% increase in crop yield. The farmers want to expand the system to 3 more villages. I smiled and typed back. Excellent work. Let's talk about scaling on Thursday. Real problems, real solutions, real impact. Just like we talked about in class, sometimes the best revenge is just living well. You know what winning actually looks like. It's not applause or magazine covers or ice sculptures shaped like your company logo. It's standing in your office, your real office, not some marble temple to corporate excess. Watching people solve problems that mattered. I was back at Leoratech, but it looked nothing like the place Sophia had turned into her personal stage. Gone were the champagne fountains and artisanal coffee bars and networking lounges that served no purpose except burning money. Instead, the space hummed with the sound of actual work. Keyboards clicking, code compiling, engineers collaborating on solutions instead of posing for LinkedIn photos. Janet Cross walked by, no longer clicking her pen like a nervous metronome. She'd thrived under actual financial guardrails, turned out. Amazing what happens when someone gives you clear rules instead of vague suggestions about brand building and executive presence. My phone buzzed. Layla, texting from Neuron Layer's new offices. Microsoft deal is official. 3-year contract, $127 million. Also, Elena says hi and wants to know if you're free for dinner Thursday. Somewhere that serves actual food, not networking opportunities. I smiled and typed back. Tell Elena yes, and congratulations on changing the world. That afternoon, I walked through Columbia's campus to my advanced AI ethics class. Aria Nguyen had just defended her thesis on algorithmic bias in healthcare, work that MIT was already trying to recruit her for. Tund Okafor's crop optimization system was expanding to 12 African countries, helping farmers increase yields while reducing environmental impact. Real work. Real impact. Real people solving real problems. That evening, I stood at my apartment window, watching Central Park settle into darkness 34 floors below. No, wait, I wasn't 34 floors up anymore. I was on the 8th floor of a building where people knew each other's names, where Mrs. Chen still brought me dumplings, where success was measured in satisfied customers and students who changed the world instead of press coverage and quarterly projections. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Mr. Kwan, this is Sarah Martinez from TechCrunch. We're doing a follow-up piece on the Leoritech transition. How would you define success now compared to a year ago? I looked around my comfortable apartment, thought about my students defending dissertations that would help millions of people, considered the quiet satisfaction of building things that mattered instead of things that impressed. Success, I said, is when you don't need an audience to validate your accomplishments. When the work speaks for itself, and the impact matters more than the applause. That's unexpectedly philosophical for a tech CEO. Maybe that's the problem with how we define leadership in this industry. After I hung up, I poured myself a small glass of that 25-year-old Glendronach and sat in my comfortable chair with a book about quantum mechanics. Outside, the city continued its eternal dance of ambition and dreams and people trying to make something of themselves. But for the first time in years, I wasn't part of that frantic energy. I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do, with people who valued substance over style. My phone buzzed one more time. Elena, sending a photo from Neuron Layer's celebration dinner. 20-something brilliant engineers raising glasses of beer, grinning like they'd just discovered fire. The caption read, "Thank you for showing us what real success looks like." I smiled and turned off my phone. Some victories don't need documentation. They just need to be real. Outside, Manhattan glittered with a million stories of people chasing their definitions of winning. But up here, in a quiet apartment where the coffee came from a simple machine and the furniture was chosen for comfort instead of status, I'd found something better than winning. I'd found peace. And in a city that never sleeps, in an industry that never stops performing, in a world that confuses noise with progress, peace was the rarest victory of all. The war was over. The battlefield was quiet. And for the first time in years, Adrian Kwan was exactly where he belonged. 10 years. That's how long we'd been married. A decade of shared meals, arguments over burnt toast, late-night road trips, and plans built one after the other like dominoes we never expected to fall. When Callista suggested a trip to Aspen to celebrate our anniversary, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was her way of telling me she wanted to fix things. The past year had been rocky. Distance crept in like a draft under a locked door. But people drift sometimes. I figured the mountains might bring us back together. Fresh snow. Crackling fires. Something real. I was wrong. That evening, we were seated at a rustic lodge with a panoramic view of the snow-covered pines. The table was dressed with white linen and golden candlelight. A bottle of red wine set open between us, half-finished. Callista had dressed in a dark green velvet dress, something elegant but effortless. Her laugh echoed a little too loud for the quiet room, especially when her cousin Jordan leaned in and whispered something. I caught the last word. Finally. They were both tipsy, cheeks flushed, but there was something else. Something rehearsed. I smiled, tried to hold on to the moment. The waiter placed a seared steak in front of me, rosemary dancing in the air. I just lifted my fork when Callista reached for her glass, swirled it lazily, and said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. "By the way," she said, not even looking at me, "I sold your cabin. My boyfriend needed the money." There was no build-up, no apology, no hesitation. She said it the way someone might say they'd changed the curtains. My fork stopped in midair. I looked up. I thought I had misheard her. But then Jordan snorted, wiping the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. "He'll get over it," she muttered, trying not to laugh. I looked at the two of them, calm, still, like they had planned this moment, like this was their punchline to some inside joke. My stomach twisted, not from shock. That had passed in the first few seconds. What settled in was colder, sharper. A silence inside me so loud it blocked out every sound in the room. I watched her lean back in her chair, satisfied with the drama she had caused, probably expecting some kind of reaction, rage, begging, disbelief, something to show her she'd won. But I didn't give her that. Instead, I smiled. Not the kind you give when you're happy. No. This smile was colder than the ice clinking in her wine glass. "That's funny," I said softly, reaching into the inside pocket of my coat. My fingers wrapped around a document I'd folded hours ago. Not because I expected this, but because I had stopped trusting her months before. Maybe even a year. Her eyes shifted to my hand as I pulled out the envelope. Slowly, calmly. I didn't even rush the moment. I placed it gently on the table, right beside her water glass, and slid it across the wood toward her with 2 fingers. Jordan leaned over to peek, still smiling, still tipsy, until she saw what was inside. Deeds, sale contracts, authorization signatures, Callista's name, my name, notarized, dated, final. She looked confused. What's that? She asked, her voice flat now. I leaned back in my chair, not even bothering to touch the steak anymore. I sold something too, I said simply. Callista reached out with a trembling hand. She pulled the document from the envelope and began to scan it. The blood drained from her face. You sold the account, she whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word. No, I corrected her, still smiling. I sold our joint investment account. The one I built for 10 years. The one you had access to, but never contributed to. You know the one, right? The account you borrowed against when you wanted that wellness retreat in Miami last spring. Jordan wasn't laughing anymore. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the leather booth. You can't do that, Callista said, but there wasn't much force behind it. I already did, I replied, my tone flat now. 3 days ago. Every dollar. Moved. Cashed. Redirected. It's done. Her face turned red, then pale, then red again. That's theft, she hissed. No, I said, eyes locked on hers. That's partnership. You know, the kind where one person does all the work and the other pretends to care. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. The silence that followed was so thick it swallowed the entire room. Even the waiter who had been approaching our table with a dessert menu took one look at us and turned back toward the kitchen. For a long moment, nobody said anything. I leaned forward just slightly, resting my elbows on the table, and studied the woman I once thought I'd grow old with. She looked nothing like the girl I met a decade ago. Or maybe she did, and I had just been too blind to see who she really was. Her lips parted again, probably to try and claw back some sort of power, but I cut her off. You sold my cabin, I said, my voice soft but controlled. Without my knowledge. Without my permission. And now you think you're still in control? I shook my head. You made your move, Callista. That was your mistake. Because now I get to make mine. Jordan finally found her voice. Look, this doesn't have to be ugly, eh? I raised my hand to stop her. You laughed, I said, my eyes never leaving Callista. When she told me what she did, you thought this was funny. Jordan looked away. I stood up. My chair scraped against the stone floor. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even take the documents back. I left them right there on the table like a calling card. A warning. A line drawn in granite. Callista stared up at me, still holding the papers. Her hands shaking slightly now. We can talk about this, she finally said, her voice barely audible. No, I replied. We're done talking. Then I turned and walked out of the restaurant. The cold aspen air hit me like a slap, but it was the kind of slap that wakes you up. I felt my breath freeze on impact, saw it cloud in front of me. I didn't look back. I didn't wait for her to follow, because I already knew she wouldn't. And that was the last moment I ever spent with her in a place we once called romantic. It wasn't a celebration. It was a funeral. For everything we built, or thought we did. And the burial started with a single toast. A toast that burned everything. The drive down from Aspen was long and quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even think about where I was going, not at first. My hands just stayed on the wheel. I was locked on the winding road that cut through the mountains like a scar. Snowflakes started falling around me. Light at first, then thick and fast. But I didn't stop. I needed distance. From the lodge. From Callista. From everything I thought I understood about my life. It was strange how numb I felt. Like my body was operating on autopilot while my mind sat quietly in the passenger seat. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. Not yet. Those emotions were waiting somewhere ahead, biding their time. Right now, I was just hollow. I reached Denver close to midnight and pulled up outside Rory's place. He lived in an old brick building in the Five Points district, top floor, corner unit, the kind of space that smelled like espresso and ambition. I texted him before knocking, and the door opened almost immediately. Rory didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me. His dark eyes sharp, calculating, always reading between the lines. He'd been my closest friend since college, someone who understood things without needing them explained. He saw the way I looked, the silence in my face. He stepped aside and let me in. Spare rooms made up, he said as I walked past him. Whiskey's on the counter. I didn't go to the room. I went straight to the kitchen, poured myself a glass, and leaned against the island as the heat of the liquor moved through my chest. She sold the cabin, I said after a long silence. Rory raised an eyebrow. Wait, what? Sold it? Just like that? Said her boyfriend needed the money. He blinked. Wait, what boyfriend? I looked at him. Exactly. The words came slowly, like poison leaking from a wound. I told him everything. The dinner. The announcement. Jordan's laugh. The look on Callista's face when I slid the documents across the table. When I finished, Rory didn't speak right away. He walked over to the window, looked out at the dark city beyond, and folded his arms. That cabin was in your name, he said eventually. I know. She couldn't have sold it legally. She forged my signature. Rory turned back to face me. There was no shock on his face, just something colder. Focused. She's been planning this for a while, he said. You don't pull something like that overnight. She's been working on this behind your back. I nodded. Rory walked to his desk, picked up his laptop, and opened it. We're just getting started, he muttered, already typing. Tell me everything you still share. Accounts. Properties. Anything with both your names on it. It hit me then, not emotionally, but strategically. I had been living beside someone I thought I knew, while she had quietly built a plan to gut me from the inside out. The signs had been there. The sudden interest in our finances. The random trips. The coldness in her voice when she said, we're just in a rough patch. A rough patch, she called it. Meanwhile, she was funding a man I'd never met with money from my family's land. I sat across from Rory and began listing everything. The joint investment account. The Breckenridge condo. 2 vehicles. A safety deposit box. A wine membership. The art we collected over the years. Piece by piece, we laid it all out. And one by one, Rory began pulling up documents. She signed for the investment account as a joint owner? He asked. Yeah, 5 years ago. He tapped a few keys. You built that portfolio. She never added a cent. I know. He looked at me. We can use that. We worked until nearly 3 a.m. Rory pulling data, me remembering details I tried to forget. I showed him old emails, login information, the lease agreements I still had copies of in my email archive. The wine burned in my veins, but my mind was clearer than it had been in months. At some point, I stopped seeing Callista's face as my wife. I started seeing her as a threat. Not emotional, not dramatic, just dangerous. Like a chess opponent who had made her move too early and assumed I wouldn't know how to respond. The next morning, Rory brewed strong coffee and handed me a plan. Literal bullet points on paper. Steps. Actions. A quiet strategy that would allow me to take back control of everything she thought she had won. You said you sold the investment account, he asked. I nodded. 3 days ago. Good. Then she's probably just realizing now that her safety net is gone. That money's been moved. All of it. He smiled faintly. Perfect. We use that panic. You're going to vanish from her world. No contact. No replies. No reaction. She's going to spiral, and we're going to watch her fall into the trap she set for you. He slid a new document across the table. What's this? I asked. An affidavit of ownership and investment contribution. We'll build your defense from the ground up. If this goes to court, we're going to make sure the record shows you built everything. She just signed the forms. I leaned back in my chair. The weight in my chest had shifted. Still heavy, but different now. Controlled. Focused. I didn't want revenge. Not the kind that comes with screaming matches or broken glass. I wanted truth. Exposure. For the world, and maybe even herself, to see exactly who she had become. And I wasn't going to say another word to her until I was ready. Later that day, I packed a small duffel and moved into the spare room. I didn't take much. Just clothes, my laptop, and a notebook. Everything else could wait. I needed to disappear for a while. Let her think I'd vanished. Let her wonder. I didn't answer her texts. I didn't return her calls. When she emailed asking where I was, I deleted it without reading past the first line. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask if I was okay. She said, we need to talk. She said, why are you acting like this? She said, you're being dramatic. And with every message, every attempt to spin her betrayal into something I was supposed to accept, I felt the cold steel of my resolve harden. She'd sold something that didn't belong to her. And now I was going to take back what did. Not with noise, not with threats, but with silence and precision. Because sometimes, the most powerful goodbye is the one you don't say at all. It started with a shoebox. One of those dusty ones shoved to the back of a closet, filled with paperwork you never expect to matter again. Inside were deed copies, title transfer receipts, and a faded black and white photo of me and my grandfather standing in front of the cabin in Montana, smiling, proud, alive. That cabin wasn't just property. It was memory. My grandfather built it by hand. Every nail, every beam, he taught me how to swing a hammer on that porch. He taught me how to patch a roof, chop wood, and listen to silence without needing to fill it. And now it was gone. I sat on the floor of Rory's guest room, documents spread out around me like a crime scene. Except I wasn't the victim, I was the investigator. The cabin had been in my family for 3 generations. After my grandfather passed, it was willed directly to me. I never co-signed anything with Callista. I never gave her access. And yet, she sold it. Sold my inheritance. The signature on the title transfer looked like mine at first glance. Same looping R, same lean in the letters. But the more I stared at it, the more the details fell apart. Rory confirmed it. It's a forgery, he said, holding the paper under a desk lamp. A decent one, but not good enough. We sent copies to a handwriting analyst the next morning. The report came back in 2 days. Highly probable forgery. That gave us leverage. But what came next turned leverage into firepower. Rory had a contact, someone who worked in financial forensics. With a few nudges and the right keywords, we began tracking Callista's digital footprints. Bank transfers. Travel receipts. VPN routes. It took less than a week to locate a pattern. $42,000. That's how much she got from selling the cabin. A cash buyer, no mortgage trail. The funds were transferred into one of our joint savings accounts, but they didn't sit there long. Within 48 hours, they were wired to an account in Florida under the name Tyrese Bennett. I didn't recognize the name at first, but when I searched it, along with Callista's email address, the picture filled in fast. Tyrese was a personal trainer based out of Miami. He ran a boutique gym that hadn't turned a profit in years. His social media was flooded with motivational quotes, shirtless selfies, and awkward live streams where he begged followers to sign up for training sessions. And in the middle of all that glittering desperation, I found her. Callista. In a video clip from 6 weeks earlier, she was standing behind him, laughing, clapping, hyping him up like they were a team. She had a baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses on, but I knew her. I knew that laugh, that voice. She wasn't hiding. She just didn't think I'd ever be looking. There it was, the reason she sold the cabin. The boyfriend Jordan joked about at the dinner table. He was real, and he was broke. Rory stared at the screen over my shoulder. "You're bankrolling this guy's pipe dream," he muttered. "No," I said, voice low steady. "Not anymore." I kept digging. At night, while Rory worked on spreadsheets for his clients, I sat at the dining table piecing together timelines. Her trips, the cabin sale, the investments she made in that gym. I followed the paper trail like a hunter in the woods, each clue more absurd than the last. She had sent money under different transaction notes. Wellness services, consulting fee, vendor payout, all carefully worded to look like legitimate business expenses. She wasn't just cheating. She was laundering. With Rory's help, I compiled a dossier. Dates, screenshots, transfer confirmations, even a few blurry photos from Tyrese's Instagram showing her at events she had told me were girls-only yoga retreats. Every detail she lied about. Every dollar she siphoned. Every breadcrumb that led back to the man she thought I'd never find. One night, as I sat reviewing the documents again, Rory slid a manila envelope across the table. "Background check," he said. "On Tyrese. You're going to want to sit down." I opened it. Tyrese had 2 prior arrests, one for fraud, one for identity theft. Both were sealed, but we knew enough people to get a summary. He'd scammed a woman out of her inheritance in 2015. Promised her a business venture. Disappeared with the cash. That woman had tried to press charges, but by the time police caught up, the money was gone and Tyrese had vanished. Charges dropped for insufficient evidence. Callista knew. She had to know. She wasn't stupid. She was calculating. Strategic. The woman I married was good with details, good with people, and better with lies than I ever gave her credit for. The worst part? She probably thought she was protecting him. Or maybe she thought she could control him. Maybe she was using me to control him. That's when it hit me. This wasn't an affair. It was a partnership. I wasn't dealing with a cheating spouse. I was dealing with a con team. A duo. She was the strategist, and he was the muscle. The smile. The sob story. She had helped him before. She'd helped him now. And unless I did something, they were going to walk away clean again. I sat back in my chair and stared at the wall. My hands trembled for the first time since Aspen. I thought about the nights she said she was working late, the weekends she claimed she needed space, all those mornings I'd made her coffee, kissed her forehead, told her to be safe, while she was stealing from me in broad daylight. Rory finally broke the silence. "You okay?" "No," I said, "but I know what I have to do now." I gathered the documents and began making digital copies. I labeled everything, created folders, cross-referenced timestamps. I didn't care how long it took. I was going to dismantle whatever illusion she had built around herself. I started drafting a formal complaint for the real estate board. The forged title transfer was step one. That would buy time. I also began compiling an identity theft report because I had a gut feeling we weren't done discovering just how far she'd gone. Rory suggested we keep a low profile. No direct accusations. Not yet. We needed to make sure we were ahead of them legally before we went on the offensive. So I nodded. I agreed. But inside me, something was changing. There's a moment when a man stops trying to salvage something and starts preparing to destroy it instead. I'd hit that point, and there was no coming back. Because once someone steals your past, your family's legacy, your trust, your name, you stop trying to reason with them. You start making sure they'll never be able to do it again. And that's when the real war begins. The first thing I did was freeze the joint accounts. Every last one of them. I didn't announce it. I didn't send a warning. I just logged in early that morning, coffee still warm in my hand, and locked it all down. With a few clicks, I stripped away her access to everything we once built together. She probably didn't even notice right away. That was the beauty of silence. Let her keep spinning on autopilot. Let her swipe and swipe until the card stops working in the middle of some high-end boutique. I wanted her to feel the slow burn of confusion, the helplessness I had. Years of careful investment, slowly grown into something solid. She'd never paid attention to them, never asked what I was doing when I stayed up late analyzing market trends. She just signed when I told her to. She thought that gave her ownership. But 6 months ago, she'd granted me power of attorney for emergency purposes. She never bothered to revoke it. Maybe she forgot. Maybe she thought I'd never use it. She was wrong. I sold everything. Cashed out just before a downturn. The timing was almost poetic. Transferred the funds to a private trust under a new entity name. She couldn't trace it, not directly. It wasn't hidden. It was just out of reach. Like everything else I was about to take back. The condo in Breckenridge came next. Our second home, or so we called it. In truth, it was hers in function, mine in finance. She had decorated it like a showroom. White furniture, abstract paintings, expensive rugs that nobody was allowed to step on. It was the one place where I felt like a guest in my own life. I found the documents buried in a folder on my external drive. A quick glance at the notarized page reminded me her signature had granted me full control in case of a financial emergency. I didn't hesitate. I listed the property. Quietly. Discreetly. A private buyer made an offer within 3 days. She didn't even get a notice until the transaction was finalized. By then, the proceeds were already split, and her portion was tied up in legal review. She sent her first message that night. "Callista, hey, just saw something weird. Why are the Breckenridge utilities in someone else's name?" No greeting. No, how are you? No remorse. I didn't reply. A few hours later came another message. "Callista, did you move money from the brokerage account? My card got declined at Whole Foods." Still no apology. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. Then a third, angrier one. "Callista, are you trying to punish me? Grow up, Liam." That one made me laugh out loud. She called me immature. After forging my signature. After selling my grandfather's cabin. After funneling money into a gym owned by a fraud with biceps for brains. She thought I was the one being petty? No, I wasn't being petty. I was being precise. She called the next morning. I watched the screen light up with her name. Didn't answer. Let it go to voicemail. Her voice was steady, too steady. Like someone rehearsing a script. "Liam, I don't know what's going on, but I think we should talk. Maybe we both made mistakes. Let's not throw everything away over a misunderstanding." I deleted the message without finishing it. The truth was, I'd spent most of our marriage giving her the benefit of the doubt. Explaining away red flags. Telling myself she was just stressed, tired, distant. But now that I saw her clearly, the illusion was broken. And it couldn't be put back together. The silence on my end seemed to rattle her. She started sending longer emails. First pretending to care. Then accusing. Then bargaining. One day, I opened a particularly dramatic one. Subject: You're being cruel. Body: You can't just ghost me. You can't shut down everything like this. I'm still your wife. You owe me the courtesy of a conversation. But that's the thing, there was nothing left to talk about. She had told me everything I needed to know when she sold the cabin and laughed about it with her cousin. That wasn't a mistake. That was a declaration. And now, I was responding in kind. Rory kept tabs on the fallout. He tracked the bounced transactions, the flagged accounts, the growing trail of digital confusion she left behind as she tried to understand how the world was unraveling around her. Her financial confidence was crumbling. She couldn't play the role of the calm, in-control wife anymore. Not when her cards didn't work and her backup plan in Miami wasn't answering her calls. It was slow, intentional, like pulling a thread and watching the entire fabric fall apart. Meanwhile, I moved into a small loft downtown. Minimalist. Clean. No memories in the walls. I bought a second-hand couch, a steel table, and a mattress that didn't creak under the weight of someone else's lies. It wasn't home, but it was peace. And for the first time in years, I didn't wake up dreading the sound of someone else's footsteps. I changed my number, got a new bank, filed a request to monitor my credit for identity theft. I made myself invisible to her. Not out of fear, but out of power. Let her wonder. Let her stew. Let her sit in the ruins of her own design and try to understand how it all fell apart so quickly. That was the irony she thought she could take from me without consequence. She thought I would scream, beg, cry. But I didn't do any of that. I didn't even curse her name. I just disappeared, took back what was mine, and left her with nothing but confusion. Because sometimes, the worst punishment isn't rage. It's indifference. And while she tried to piece together where I'd gone, who I'd spoken to, what I knew, I was already 10 steps ahead. With every quiet move I made, I reclaimed another part of myself that I hadn't even realized I'd lost. The money? That was one thing. But the silence? That was the real weapon. The knock came just after noon on a Thursday. I was in the kitchen of the loft, scraping burnt eggs out of a pan, still getting used to cooking only for myself. For a second, I thought it might be a delivery or maybe Rory stopping by. But something about the knock was different. 3 firm raps. Not hesitant. Not rushed. Just deliberate. I wiped my hands, walked over to the door, and opened it slowly. She stood there, shoulders squared, jaws set, eyes sharp. Not Callista. Someone else. A woman I'd never seen before, maybe in her late 30s. Dark hair tied back, plain jacket zipped to her throat, and a manila envelope clutched in her left hand like it was a weapon. You don't know me, she said, before I could ask. But I used to be married to Tyrese. That stopped me cold. My fingers tightened around the doorknob, and a dozen questions filled my head, but I said nothing. Just opened the door wider and stepped aside. She didn't even hesitate, walked right in like she belonged there. She looked around, gave a faint nod at the clean space, then turned to me and held up her phone. The screen lit up with photos, screenshots, documents, bank statements. Then she flipped open the envelope and laid more evidence on the counter like playing cards. Your wife's doing to you what she and Tyrese did to me, she said. Word for word, move for move. Her name was Harper. And for the next hour, she laid it all out. She'd met Tyrese 6 years ago when he was trying to open a smoothie bar in Miami. He charmed her with big promises and big muscles. Said all he needed was a little financial support to get started. She was a nurse back then, worked long shifts, didn't have much, but she believed in him, gave him everything she could, cleared out savings, took out a small loan. He drained her dry. Then he brought Callista in first as a friend, then as business manager. Harper hadn't thought anything of it until one day, Tyrese changed the locks on the apartment, and Harper found out she wasn't just being left. She was being erased. I couldn't prove anything, she said, voice flat. They made it look like I was unstable, emotional. He told people I was obsessed with him. She backed it all up. They made me feel like I was the problem. I leaned against the counter, watching her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't here for pity. There was steel in her voice. Strength built from scars. I saw Callista in one of his new videos last month, she went on. I recognized the voice, the walk. And then I started seeing money transfers again. Names I didn't recognize. But yours came up in one of the filings, legal documents tied to a business account in Tampa. That's when I started digging. She pulled out a printout. It showed the name of a company I'd never heard of before, Tide Rise Wellness LLC. Registered under my name. Linked to my social security number. My address. I stared at the paper. She used me to open this? Harper nodded. It's a front. They're laundering money through it. Mostly gym-related sales, supplements, memberships. But it's fake. I ran the numbers. The inventory doesn't match the deposits. And it's in your name, which means if the IRS ever gets involved, you're the one they're coming after. My mouth went dry. She wasn't just lying. She wasn't just cheating. She was setting me up. Harper crossed her arms, her eyes locking onto mine. I'm not here for revenge. I'm not here to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know before it's too late. I swallowed hard, nodded slowly, then gestured toward the tiny table by the window. She sat. I poured us both water. My hands were still trembling. How did you survive it? I asked. She let out a bitter laugh. Barely. Moved in with my sister. Filed bankruptcy. Took years to rebuild my credit. The only thing that kept me sane was knowing someone else would eventually see them for what they were. That someone, apparently, was me. We talked for another hour. She handed over everything. USB drive, documents, a timeline she had mapped out. I promised to stay in touch, and when she left, I just stood at the door for a while, listening to the silence. Then I got to work. I sent everything Harper gave me to Rory. 30 minutes later, he called. This is worse than we thought, he said. She used your name to file for a small business grant. There's government money tied to this. If that warehouse address is flagged, you're looking at federal charges. I didn't speak. He continued, you need to file for identity theft now. Not tomorrow. Now. Before this thing blows up in your face. I took a breath. Deep. Centered. Then I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I'll do it. And you'll need a lawyer, he added. Not a regular one. A defense attorney. Someone who knows how to navigate federal investigations. I'll find one, I said. No, he replied. I'll find one for you. I hung up and stood in the center of my loft, everything around me suddenly feeling smaller. Tighter. My life was becoming a noose, pulled tighter by the hands of someone I once loved. She'd taken my trust, my money, my cabin, and now she was trying to take my name. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. This was about survival. I drove to a local precinct and filed the identity theft report myself. Took copies of everything. Sat with an officer for over an hour going through the forms. They took my statement. I handed over a copy of Harper's folder too. Then I contacted a federal attorney Rory recommended. A woman named Clarissa Vale. She was sharp, fast-talking, and didn't sugarcoat anything. You're lucky, she said after our first call. If Harper hadn't come forward, you might have found yourself facing real charges. I'm not interested in lucky, I told her. I want this done right. Clarissa began filing the paperwork immediately. She initiated the fraud alerts, contacted the IRS, and drafted a formal notice of dispute for any documents tied to Tide Rise Wellness. Her tone never changed. Professional, surgical. She didn't care about the drama. She only cared about the facts. And the facts were damning. That night, I got one more email from Callista. Subject, we need to talk before this gets worse. Body, I know you're upset. But freezing the accounts, selling the condo, this is getting childish. I think we're both making mistakes. Let's meet. I didn't respond. She didn't know yet. She didn't know Harper had come. That the fraud was exposed. That the company she built with Tyrese was now under review by a federal defense team. And I wasn't going to tell her. Let her keep writing her story. Because I was already writing the ending. And this time, she wouldn't be the one holding the pen. It was 6:47 a.m. When the first light crept through the blinds of my loft, drawing long lines across the floor like prison bars. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours, but I didn't feel tired. My mind was too sharp, too full, too awake. Harper's visit had changed everything. No more playing defense. It was time to move. Fast. Smart. Quiet. I called Rory before the sun had fully risen. He answered on the first ring. It's time, I said. He didn't ask what I meant. He already knew. By 9 o'clock, I was sitting across from Leo Kramer in a quiet corner booth at an out-of-the-way cafe near the edge of town. He was ex-military, sharp-eyed, all muscle and calculation. Wore a plain black jacket and a silver watch that ticked louder than the espresso machine behind the counter. Rory had called in a favor. Said Leo was the best man to handle what came next. Leo took one look at the folder I slid across the table and raised an eyebrow. Your wife forged documents, created a shell company under your name, and funneled money into it with a man who has a fraud record? I nodded. He nodded back. All right then. Let's dismantle their world. No drama. No posturing. Just cold focus. Exactly what I needed. Leo started with digital forensics. Within 48 hours, he tracked down the formation documents for Tiderise Wellness LLC. They were filed through an online business service that required minimal verification. Just a name, a social security number, and a mailing address. All of it in my name. But the IP address used to create the documents? That came from a hotel in Miami. 2 days after Callista's so-called retreat. She didn't even try to hide it. That's what stunned me most. The arrogance. The belief that I'd never look closely, never dig, never fight back. Maybe she thought I'd be too hurt to see clearly. Maybe she was counting on me to fall apart. But I didn't fall. I calculated. Leo kept digging. Within a week, he uncovered 6 separate transfers from our joint account to Tiderise, each labeled under different business justifications. Marketing budget, equipment order, contractor fee. And each one landed squarely in a checking account belonging to Tyrese. Not a business account, a personal one. Leo traced the money trail further. Crypto wallets, third-party payment processors, dummy vendors created to mimic legitimate wellness brands. It was a full-scale laundering system. Sloppy in some places, surgical in others. The IRS had already flagged one of the transactions in an internal audit, though nothing had come down the pipeline yet. If this explodes, Leo said during one late-night call, you're going to be caught in the blast unless we get ahead of it. I had already filed the identity theft report. Clarissa, my attorney, had submitted preliminary notices to the IRS, local authorities, and even the Florida Secretary of State's office. She was building a firewall, one document at a time. But we needed more. We needed proof that Callista was behind it, not just suspicion. That's when Leo found the address. The warehouse. Listed on the business registration was a small industrial unit on the outskirts of Tampa. I flew down the next day. Alone. The place looked like every other building on the strip. Concrete. Dull. With a metal roll-up door and a cracked parking lot. But inside was silence. Dust. A few empty shelves, a stack of unopened boxes labeled Fitness Blend Protein, and a fold-out table with a laptop that hadn't been used in weeks. Leo was already there when I arrived. He'd picked the lock earlier and was walking me through the space like a detective at a crime scene. This is where it all lands, he said, pointing at a corkboard with faded sticky notes. Fake invoices, shell vendors, inventory that never existed. In a drawer beneath the table, we found receipts. Names I recognized, including my own. They were printing labels with my name on them. Shipping supplements and fitness gear as owner-approved products. All fake. All traceable. She wanted me to take the fall, I said out loud. Leo didn't respond. He didn't need to. I took photos, gathered copies. We logged the evidence and handed everything to Clarissa. She smiled for the first time since we'd met. This is exactly what I needed, she said. Now we make it official. By the end of the week, she had filed formal identity theft charges, requested a forensic audit of the business, and submitted evidence to the IRS and Florida Bureau of Financial Investigations. The paper trail we had gathered was tight. Solid. It screamed intent. Fraud. Conspiracy. My name was on everything. But now so were her fingerprints. And still, Callista kept texting. Callista, I heard you were in Florida. What are you doing? Callista, we can fix this, Liam. I just made some bad decisions. Callista, please, let's meet. I'll explain everything. I stared at the screen. She was unraveling. But I didn't answer. Instead, I forwarded the messages to Clarissa. She's going to try to talk her way out, I told her. She'll have her chance, Clarissa replied. In court. 2 days later, we got confirmation. The IRS had launched a formal inquiry into Tiderise Wellness. They called me in for a statement. Clarissa handled everything. By the time we were done, I was listed as a cooperating victim in a federal fraud case. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was preparing to press charges. Tyrese, still unaware of how close the storm was, posted a video on social media the next morning. He was standing in the gym, sweaty, smiling, arms wide like he was about to deliver a sermon. I watched him talk about loyalty and vision while standing in the ruins of what was soon to be his downfall. And in the background, I saw her. Callista, off to the side, barely visible, wearing sunglasses indoors, like always. I didn't feel pain when I saw her. I didn't feel rage. What I felt was quiet, the kind of silence that comes after a long storm. The kind that tells you the sky's about to clear, And what's left standing after the wind dies down is what really matters. I turned off the video and opened my laptop. Leo had sent the final piece of the puzzle. A time-stamped login. The business bank account. IP matched to her apartment. And the transaction memo? Reimbursement for consultation, CL. Her initials. It was over. I knew it. Rory knew it. Leo knew it. All that was left was for her to know it too. I sent the evidence package to Clarissa. She called back within the hour. "This is it," she said. "We've got her." And for the first time in months, I exhaled. Not in relief, but in preparation. Because the next time I saw Callista, it wouldn't be at a table, or a dinner, or a therapy session. It would be in court. And this time, the setup wouldn't be hers. It would be mine. The envelope was thick when it landed in my mailbox. Cream-colored. Heavy. Official. The kind of envelope that doesn't bring birthday cards or thank you notes. Clarissa had warned me I might get one, but seeing it with my name stamped in bold across the front still sent a chill through me. I brought it inside, set it on the table, and just stared at it for a moment. It wasn't a surprise, but it still felt like a punch. Inside was a civil lawsuit, filed by Callista. She was suing me for misappropriation of marital funds. According to the paperwork, I had intentionally withdrawn and concealed assets from our shared accounts, leaving her financially stranded and emotionally traumatized. The words jumped off the page like spit in my face. She was trying to flip the script, to make me the villain in the story she wrote with her lies and forged documents. I sat back, the paper still in my hands, trying to understand the logic behind it. She had stolen from me, betrayed me, and nearly got me federally indicted. And now she was accusing me of financial abuse. "She's cornered," she said immediately. "This is desperation disguised as offense. She's trying to get ahead of the charges?" "Exactly. If she can frame you as the aggressor, she might negotiate leniency, or at least stall the investigation." That settled something deep inside me. She was scared. She knew what was coming. In this lawsuit, it was her way of trying to throw sand in my eyes before the final blow landed. "I want to counter," I said. "We will," Clarissa replied. "But first, we prepare." And that's what we did. Over the next few weeks, I worked with Clarissa and Rory to gather everything. Every bank statement, every email, every signed document. Leo was relentless. He found old chat logs, VPN records, and flagged IP addresses linked to Callista's devices. He mapped out her digital trail like a forensic artist sketching a suspect's face. But the most damning piece came from Harper. She had kept everything. Voice memos from Tyrese, screenshots of group chats where Callista coached him on what to say, even copies of a Google Doc where they laid out a target profile, descriptions of financially stable partners they could exploit. My name was at the top of one of the lists. Liam D., it read. Owns cabin. Multiple investment accounts. Passive. Predictable. Too nice. That last word, nice, nearly made me laugh. Because nice was gone now. Clarissa compiled everything into what she called the betrayal files. It was a binder, 3 inches thick, tabbed by date, category, and relevance. Every forged document, every unauthorized transaction, every digital breadcrumb that led back to her and Tyrese. You know what the best part is? Clarissa said during our final prep meeting. She's going to walk into that courtroom thinking this is about a marriage. I raised an eyebrow. And it's not. No, she said. It's about a conspiracy. The day of the hearing, I arrived in a dark suit. Nothing flashy. Just clean and silent. Rory stood beside me, calm and unreadable. Clarissa was already inside, setting up the exhibits. The courtroom smelled like paper and dust. Rows of wooden benches. A judge's bench that looked like it had seen decades of lies. Callista arrived 10 minutes late. She walked in like she was the victim in a film. Hair pulled into a perfect bun, white blouse tucked into a skirt too formal for the occasion. She glanced at me, smiled faintly. The kind of smile that's meant to disarm, as if we were still something that could be fixed. I didn't return it. Her lawyer looked younger than her. Nervous. Kept checking his notes, glancing my way like he was hoping I'd slip and confirm something with a twitch of my face. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The bailiff called the case. And then it began. Her attorney started with the expected, claiming financial abandonment, emotional hardship, and the classic phrase, intent to conceal. I listened without blinking. Let him paint his picture. Let him try to cast shadows where the truth stood tall. Then it was our turn. Clarissa stood slowly. No theatrics. No raised voice. Just clarity. She presented the forged cabin sale first, laid out the deed, my original signature, and the expert testimony on the forgery. Then she walked the judge through the financials, the shell company, the withdrawals, the digital fingerprints. She introduced Harper's affidavit, then Leo's, then mine. For every accusation Callista had made, we presented a wall of evidence that didn't just defend me, it exposed her. The courtroom stayed quiet. Even Callista's lawyer looked like he was reconsidering his life choices. When it came time for Callista to take the stand, she hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. She tried to cry, said she was confused, that she trusted the wrong people, that Tyrese had misled her, that she didn't know what she was signing. But Clarissa was ready. She pulled out the group chat logs, the draft messages, the audio files, and when she showed the target list, with my name at the top, the silence in the room shifted. It wasn't sympathy anymore. It was realization, disgust. The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. He looked at Callista, then at her lawyer. I find the plaintiff's claims not only unsubstantiated, he said slowly, but intentionally misleading. This case is dismissed. With prejudice. Callista's mouth opened. But he wasn't done. Additionally, given the evidence presented today, I am referring this matter to the state attorney's office and the Department of Revenue for further investigation. Bailiff, please escort Ms. Duval to the holding area. She is not to leave the premises until interviewed by the attending agents. It happened fast. 2 plainclothes agents entered from the rear of the courtroom. One approached Callista gently. The other reached into his coat and handed her a document. Her hands shook as she read it. The color drained from her face. It was a formal notice. Charges: wire fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, conspiracy to defraud. She turned to me, her eyes wide, lips trembling. Liam, please, don't let them. But I didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't say a word. She was still calling my name as they walked her out. 2 days later, Tyrese was arrested outside a strip mall gym in Miami. He went quietly. No speech, no video this time. And just like that, the empire they'd built on lies and fake promises crumbled. Not with fire, not with violence, but with the one thing they never expected. Evidence. It should have felt like victory. When the agents led Callista out of that courtroom, her hands trembling, her voice stammering some version of please that had lost all weight, I thought I'd feel a sense of closure, justice, relief. But instead, what settled over me was something heavier. Not grief, not guilt, just a strange stillness. Like standing in a house after a fire, surrounded by ashes you didn't set, but still have to clean up. Rory met me outside the courthouse. He didn't say much, just clapped a hand on my shoulder and nodded. I nodded back. That was enough. Clarissa walked out a few minutes later, binder in hand, her expression unreadable. She'll be held for questioning, she said. Depending on how honest she is, we'll know whether this stays state level or moves federal. My bet. They're going to make an example out of both of them. I raised an eyebrow. Both. Tyrese is already in custody, she replied. Florida Bureau arrested him this morning. We filed the supporting documentation to link him directly to the transactions under Tide Rise. And between Harper's affidavit, Leo's data, and the shell company trail, it's not a question of if, it's when. I didn't smile. I just nodded again. It wasn't over. Not really. Because while the courtroom was behind me, the consequences weren't. A few days later, Clarissa called me with an update. Remember that business grant? She asked. The one they filed in my name? Yep. Turns out the state approved a partial disbursement. $18,000. Which means I'm liable, I finished. She paused. Technically, yes. Until the court finalizes the fraud claim and shifts responsibility to her. But that process can take months. Maybe a year. I sank into the couch in the loft, staring at the bare wall across from me. I'd spent so long exposing the truth, proving she'd stolen from me, lied to me, used me. But that didn't erase the damage. It didn't cancel the debt. How much? I asked. $14,200, she said. That's your share under joint marital liability. Because you were still legally married when the form was signed. I closed my eyes. Of course, there's always something left behind. Always a piece of the fire that keeps burning long after the smoke clears. I'll pay it, I said quietly. Liam, we can contest it. No, I said. Let it be the last thing I pay for her. Ever. There was a silence on the line. Then she exhaled. All right. I'll send the transfer details. After I hung up, I sat there in the quiet for a long time. $14,000. It wasn't just money. It was the final price of my silence. My trust. My 10 years of looking the other way while something rotten grew right in front of me. I transferred the money that night. No hesitation. It felt like pulling a splinter from my soul. Later, I met Rory for drinks. We sat at a rooftop bar overlooking the city. Just two men who'd seen too much and said too little. He didn't toast to justice or say told you so. He just listened. You're free now, he said. I shook my head. Not yet, but I'm getting close. The next morning, Leo called. I thought you might want this, he said. He sent over a compiled report, final logs, court filings, the full list of transactions from Tiderise under both Tyrese's and Callista's names. The last entry on the list? A payment labeled Cabin Flood Claim Reimbursement, CD. What is this? I asked. She filed an insurance claim after the cabin sale, Leo said. Claimed it had been damaged during a storm. The cabin wasn't damaged, Liam. She flooded it, intentionally. Probably to make the buyer drop the price or to cover something up. I stared at the report. She vandalized my grandfather's cabin? Leo's voice lowered. She desecrated it. It was the first time I felt true anger in weeks. Not the cold kind. Not the calculating kind. This was raw. Ugly. The cabin wasn't just wood and stone. It was family. Legacy. And she destroyed it like it was disposable. I thought of that old black and white photo of me and my grandfather. Us standing in front of that porch, two proud smiles, a whole future ahead. And now, that future had been sold, flooded, claimed, and erased. I didn't cry, but I came close. I spent the rest of the week wrapping things up, closing accounts, canceling shared services, returning legal documents to Clarissa for archiving. With every box checked, I felt something loosen in my chest. Bit by bit, I was untying the knot she'd tied around my life. Then, one morning, I woke up and realized there was nothing left of her here. No photographs. No clothes. No lingering scent of her shampoo in the bathroom. She was gone. Not just physically, but in every way that mattered. Except the debt. The debt had stayed, but I didn't resent it anymore. It was a scar now. A mark of survival. Of clarity. Leo sent me one last message before signing off. This is the part they never talk about, he said. The scar tissue. He was right. People love revenge stories. The drama. The downfall. But nobody talks about what happens after. The silence. The paperwork. The therapy. The rebuilding. The small, slow moments of putting yourself back together piece by jagged piece. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood by the window. It was raining, but I didn't feel cold. I felt clean. Harper called that evening. Just to check in. She said she'd heard about the court outcome. About the charges. She sounded steadier than before. Stronger. Like someone who'd been through fire and learned how to live with the burns. They'll go down for this, she said. Eventually. I nodded. They already have. There was a pause. Then she asked, softly, so what are you going to do next? I looked around the loft. The clean counters. The empty walls. The life I had pressed reset on. I'm going to start over, I said. Simple as that. Not in a movie montage kind of way. Not with grand speeches or perfect endings. Just quietly. Honestly. One step at a time. Because I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted peace. And I was finally ready to find it. You think once the fire is out, you can breathe again. That after the final blow, the last courtroom appearance, the evidence, the cold click of justice, there's nothing left to burn. But that's not always true. Because some debts don't go away. Some stay, wrapped in fine print and forgotten clauses, just waiting to remind you that even freedom has a price tag. It was a letter this time. Plain envelope. No warning. No apology. Just my name printed at the top and a polite request for payment at the bottom. I sat at the kitchen table holding it between my fingers like it might bite. $14,200. I'd already known about the amount. Clarissa had explained it clearly after the courtroom chaos faded. It came from a refinancing document I signed 3 years ago, back when I was still trying to save a marriage that had already quietly packed its bags. Callista had slipped it in during a long stack of papers. We were consolidating debt, she said, lowering interest rates, making things easier. I hadn't read every word. That was my mistake. Buried deep inside was a clause linking me, jointly and legally, to a business loan. One that was now tied to the fraudulent company Tiderise Wellness. And even though she was the one who opened the account, used the funds, and forged the operations behind it, the debt was still real. And because we were married when it was created, I was liable. The legal process would shift the blame in time. The fraud report, the testimony, the criminal investigation, it would all work in my favor eventually. But eventually wasn't now. And the creditors? They didn't care who faked what. They just wanted their money. I ran my thumb across the edge of the letter and looked around the room. The loft was quiet, as always. Sparse, clean, small. It had no memories in the walls, which I liked. But that morning, it felt tighter. Like the walls were leaning in again. Like I was being reminded that even after all I'd done, the exposure, the silence, the plan, there were still remnants of her tangled in my life. I thought about fighting it, about dragging it into another legal battle. But something inside me said no. No more courtrooms. No more dragging this out. I was done bleeding for her decisions. So I paid it. Quietly. Without ceremony. I walked to the bank, withdrew from my personal savings, and wired the money. The teller gave me a printed receipt. I folded it and slipped it into a drawer without reading it twice. That was the last thread. The last dollar. The final consequence of a marriage built on lies. Afterward, I walked to the park down the street. It was a cold day, gray sky, scattered leaves, the kind of afternoon that kept most people indoors. But I needed to be outside, to feel the wind against my face, to remind myself I was still here, still standing. I sat on a bench overlooking a small man-made pond and let my thoughts settle. They didn't race like they used to. No more what-ifs. No more flashes of Callista's voice echoing in my ears. Just space. Silence. Scar tissue. Leo had been right. Nobody talks about this part. The part where you're free, but still feel a little broken. The part where you win, but still have to pay. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the last messages I had saved from Clarissa. Most were logistics, case updates, file transfers, closing memos. But the last one was different. Clarissa, you handled this with more grace than most people would. You walked away without destroying yourself to destroy her. That's rare. I hadn't replied, but I'd read that line over and over. Because she was right. And also wrong. I didn't walk away unscathed. I was still rebuilding from ashes. But I'd chosen not to be like Callista. I hadn't forged anything. I hadn't used someone else's name, heart, or credit score to fill a hole inside me. I'd responded with truth. With facts. With quiet resolve. And that, to me, meant more than revenge ever could. After sitting there a while, I pulled out my notebook, the one I'd carried since the day I left Aspen. Inside were notes from the early days of unraveling everything. Account numbers. Password resets. Legal steps. But further back, buried behind the battle plans, were scribbles of something different. Ideas for a new beginning. Dreams I'd paused. Projects I'd buried. Before Callista, I used to sketch ideas for a small retreat center. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet place tucked in the trees, somewhere people could disconnect, breathe, find peace. I flipped to the page where I'd drawn a rough floor plan. Cabin-style rooms. A shared kitchen. Walking trails. Fire pits under the stars. I hadn't looked at that page in years. But now? Now it didn't feel impossible anymore. A few days later, I drove to the edge of the city and met with a realtor. I told her I was looking for land. Somewhere remote. With trees. With silence. She showed me 3 properties. The first 2 were beautiful, but the third? It felt, right? It was just a clearing, really. A few acres tucked behind a long stretch of pine trees. A creek ran along the edge. No structures. Just earth. But when I stepped out of the car and stood there, breathing in the cold mountain air, something inside me settled. It wasn't the old cabin. I'd never get that back. But this? This could be mine. Truly mine. I put in an offer. A week later, it was accepted. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not Rory. Not Leo. Not even Harper, who had become a quiet presence in my life. Someone I met for coffee every few weeks, always talking about anything except the past. But the day I signed the final paperwork, I sent her a photo of the land. No caption. Just the image. She replied with a single word. Freedom. And that's what it felt like. Not escape. Not revenge. But peace. I visited the land every weekend, sometimes just to walk the edge of the creek, sometimes to sit on a folding chair with a thermos of coffee and listen to the wind. I started sketching again. Plans. Possibilities. I didn't know how long it would take to build something, or even if I would. But the idea lived again, and that was enough. One night, As I sat by the water under a sky full of stars, I took out that notebook again. I flipped to a blank page and wrote something I hadn't dared to say aloud. She took the past, but she couldn't take the future. That's mine. The cabin was gone. The one my grandfather built with his bare hands, the one where I learned how to split firewood, where we played cards by lantern light when storms knocked out the power. Callista had taken it, sold it, flooded it, and buried it under a claim. And as much as I wanted to believe I could one day get it back, I knew deep down it was never coming home. But not everything has to. Some things are meant to stay in the past, anchored to who we were before the fire came through. I stood on the porch of the new place, a quiet stretch of forest near Flathead Lake. It was still unfinished. The siding wasn't painted yet, and there was a stack of cedar planks leaning against the east wall waiting to become a deck. But it was mine, completely. Not co-signed, not borrowed, not attached to someone else's name or expectations. Mine. There was no grand celebration when I bought it. No Instagram post. No champagne pop. Just a signed deed, a quiet exhale, and a long drive through winding roads that didn't lead back to anything but peace. Most mornings, I woke up before sunrise and sat on the unfinished steps with a mug of black coffee. Just me and the sound of birds figuring out the day. No alarms. No schedules. No one asking for anything. The quiet didn't feel empty, it felt earned. Harper lived 2 towns over now. After the trials and courtrooms and long months of sorting through the aftermath, she decided she needed space, too. Not away from me, but away from the memory of what had happened. We never tried to force something romantic between us. That wasn't what we needed. What we shared was something different. A bond forged in betrayal, in survival, in understanding without explanation. We met up sometimes, usually at the local cafe that served thick toast and terrible D. The silence said enough. One day, she brought a rescue dog, some kind of shepherd mix with a crooked tail and soft eyes. I sat on the ground while he sniffed me like I was a puzzle. "You should get one," she said, sipping her tea. "Maybe," I replied, rubbing the dog's ears. "Dogs are honest," she added. "They're either happy to see you or they're not. No pretending." That made me laugh, and it stuck with me. Later that week, I adopted a black lab mix from the shelter. They called him Diesel. He was all legs and tongue and had a bark too big for his skinny frame. He followed me everywhere, as if he was afraid I might vanish if he blinked. He liked to nap on my boots and howl at distant owls like they owed him money. He made the cabin feel full. I started writing again. Not stories. Not letters. Just thoughts. I filled notebooks with memories I didn't want to lose. Good ones, like the first time I caught a fish with Grandpa or the way the cabin used to smell in winter. I didn't write about Callista. Not directly. But she showed up anyway in the quiet between sentences, in the things I was learning to let go. One evening, I checked the mailbox at the end of the gravel drive and found a letter with no return address. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Thick, expensive. The handwriting was neat, unmistakably hers. "You always thought you were smarter, but I was just faster." That was it. No apology. No regret. No ownership. Just a line that stank of pride and denial. Like she still believed she'd won something. I read it twice. Then once more, slower. And then I smiled. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. There was a time that letter would have ruined my whole day. Would have sent me into a spiral of anger or doubt. But now, it was just a whisper from a world I no longer lived in. A small reminder of who she was and who I no longer had to be. I didn't reply. I burned it. Right there in the fire pit out back. Diesel sat beside me, watching the flames crackle and curl the paper into ash. Then I stood up, stretched, and walked inside. A few days later, I got a message from Rory. Just checking in. He said he'd heard through one of his legal contacts that Tyrese had taken a plea deal. 5 years minimum. Callista's trial was still pending. There were new charges. Something about misusing federal grant money and falsifying identity records across state lines. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want them. That part of my life was over, and I wasn't going to keep dragging its ghost into my present. I spent that weekend building the deck out back. It was slow work, measuring, leveling, hammering boards while Diesel chased bugs and barked at passing clouds. But it felt good. Honest. Every nail was a little reclaiming. Every board a little reminder that I was building something real now. Something no one could forge or flood or take away. That Sunday, Harper stopped by. She brought a peach pie and 2 mugs from the cafe. We sat on the half-finished deck and watched the sun sink below the trees, the sky burning soft orange and pale purple. She pointed at the horizon. "You know what I like about this place?" she asked. "What's that?" "It's quiet," she said, "but not empty." That summed it up better than I ever could. We didn't say much after that. Just let the quiet stretch between us like a bridge. Later, after she left, I sat by the fire pit again. Diesel curled up at my feet. The stars came out one by one, soft and slow, like they were in no rush to impress. And I finally said it out loud. "You were fast," I whispered to the night, to the memory of Callista. "But I'm free." And that, I realized, was the difference. She ran from truth, hid behind lies, cut corners and built illusions, and moved through life like she was always one step from exposure. She might have been faster, louder, sharper with her tongue, but I was whole now. And wholeness isn't about speed. It's about stillness, about choosing peace over war, integrity over spectacle, healing over revenge. The cabin may have been sold, flooded, and lost, but the one in my mind, the one built from memory, forged in fire, and rebuilt in silence, still stood. And this one? No one would ever touch again.